All right. Hello and welcome to another puzzle podcast playlist, not podcast, a puzzle plot hole playlist stream. This may be the last one. We may not finish the puzzle. We'll see. But for today, it is puzzling and playlist of plot holes. So hopefully you like that I keep doing this because I'm having fun. I enjoy it. It's calm. It's relaxing. It's a lot of me yelling about Harry Potter into a microphone. So hopefully you guys are enjoying it. Hopefully you can hear me. And I didn't touch any of the settings since the last stream. So hopefully this all works. So we will get started. I'm just going to start the playlist and pause it as I need to talk about things.
That sometimes you stumble across something that just doesn't feel right. There's a line of dialogue that contradicts another, a spell that breaks all the rules of the magical universe, a bus-sized snake that is somehow fitting through all the plumbing in the school. These are what we call plot holes, and like it or not, Harry Potter looks a little bit like Swiss cheese sometimes. Today, let's go down the Harry Potter plot hole iceberg, from the most benign inconsistencies to holes so big they put the entire series at risk. Without further ado, let's dive right in and start things off with level 1.
That doesn't matter.
Peter Pettigrew on the map.
I think that's an O.
I was thinking about which topic to put first in this video, and when it came down to it, I couldn't imagine any other way to start than with Peter Pettigrew and the Marauders map. We've probably all seen the memes. Fred and George have seen Ron sleeping with a man named Peter Pettigrew in his room for years and have never mentioned it. Furthermore, wouldn't it have been cause for some concern to see a villain, murderer, loyal Voldemort servant, Peter Pettigrew, on the map roaming around the halls of Hogwarts? J.K. Rowling has addressed components of this, but honestly, I'm not convinced. Let's hear from her first before we start judging. I can tell you there's probably going to be a lot of judging in this video, so just hold your horses. She responds pretty directly as to why Fred and George didn't respond to Peter Pettigrew showing up on the map. Quote, "It would not have mattered if they had, unless somebody was very familiar with the story of Sirius Black, and after all, Sirius was not Mr. and Mrs. Weasley's best friend. Indeed, they never knew him until after he escaped from Azkaban. Fred and George would be unlikely to know or remember that Peter Pettigrew was the person Sirius
Let's switch to the actual screen.
Murdered.
I'm sorry.
Even if Fred and George had heard the story at some point, why would they assume that the Peter Pettigrew they occasionally saw moving around the map was, in fact, the man murdered years before? Fred and George used the map for their own mischief-making, so they concentrated, naturally enough, on those portions of the map where they were planning their next misdeeds. And finally, you must not forget that hundreds of little dots are moving around this map at any given time. Fred and George did not know everyone in school by name, so a single unfamiliar name was unlikely to stand out." End quote. Now, I don't know about you, but this seems awfully convenient. Fred and George didn't think anything of it because they didn't know Peter Pettigrew's name? I mean, sure, if it was just one name out of hundreds of other students' names, I would understand. But the map is explicitly used when there aren't that many students wandering around. It's used at night, when the only people out and about are Filch, Mrs. Norris, a prefect here or there, and the occasional professor. Further, if they were sneaking around and using the map with any regularity for the first 3 years, they would have without doubt checked in on Ron, even if he was just in his dorm room. They would have seen Peter Pettigrew's name amongst the names of maybe a dozen other students, tops. They would know those names, and they would know Peter wasn't one of them. They would know all the Gryffindor kids. There are a few explanations people have offered. Some suggested that the original Marauders had specifically enchanted the map not to show their names. It sounds good on the surface. It would canonically make sense. They didn't want to be seen if the map fell into the wrong hands, despite needing a very specific passphrase to work. There's only one problem. When we get to the Prisoner of Azkaban, we find that Snape has done this exact thing to track Lupin. Quote, Snape was slightly breathless, but his face was full of suppressed triumph. You're wondering, perhaps, how I knew you were here, he said, his eyes glittering. I've just been to your office, Lupin. You forgot to take your potion tonight, so I took a gobletful along. And very lucky I did. Lucky for me, I mean. Lying on your desk was a certain map. One glance at it told me all I needed to know. I saw you running along this passageway and out of sight. End quote. So, we can throw out that suggestion. I think the most compelling argument I saw was that Peter had sunk so far into his animagus form that he was no longer a human, so the map didn't track him. He was, in a sense...
Alright, so I was kind of just chilling along with this, but it's getting a little bit weird with this whole idea. So his response is that he was an animagus for so long that Peter didn't show up on the map. Because the first 3 years that Fred and George had the map, wouldn't they have checked on Ron? It's like, okay. Couple problems with that. The first 3 years that the twins would have had the map, it wouldn't have been until their 3rd year of having the map that they would have checked on Ron. And Ron didn't always have Scabbers with him. And I don't think they would have just randomly checked in the middle of the day, oh, let's see how Ron is doing. And it's been stated in the Gryffindor Tower, all the names are jumbled together. Like Harry even talks about when he looks at it, it's very hard to parse out where anybody is in the map. Unless you're looking for a specific person, and when you're looking, it seems to kind of show you that person a little bit easier. So them thinking, oh yeah, I'm gonna look for Ron, and then you would see Ron with Peter. But even then, it's like Ron's gonna be with Harry, and maybe if they look, they're gonna be in a classroom, they're gonna be in a hallway. They may be like, oh, whoever Peter is. Maybe it's that weird bucktooth kid. Oh, his name is... And then they forget about it, and then they learn the kid's name is Neville, and then don't even remember Peter. So, but stuck in the animagus form so long that he loses his name, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, unless when he's in that form, it comes up as Scabbers. Because we also don't know that. Because his name is Scabbers when he's in animagus form, and that could technically work. We don't know how the map really works. So that's just a slight thing. Like maybe when Sirius was on the map, it would show Padfoot if he was in his animagus form. But we don't see enough for us to know if that's true or not.
More rat than man. I don't know about you, but I kind of buy this one. I believe the only animal the map tracks is Mrs. Norris. We don't see it tracking Hedwig, for example, or Crookshanks, so maybe he just didn't actually show up. I don't think we ever explain.
That's also another thing. Well, we don't see it tracking Hedwig or Crookshanks. It's like, okay. But do we know that they didn't show up on the map? We've never... From our very reliable narrator of Harry's mind, did we ever have Harry go, oh, I wonder if I can find Hedwig on the map? No. So I think that's a bad take on that. It's like, oh, well, we didn't see these creatures on here. It's like, yeah, well, Harry was never looking for those creatures. So, yeah, I think that's also a bad take on that.
Explicitly see Peter on the map in the books, so maybe the simple answer is that he just never actually showed up on it, and what we see is just a plot hole specific to the movies. The jury is still out on this one, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. J.K. Rowling seems to imply that his name actually does show up, the twins just don't see it. So, is that reasonable, or am I the only one that thinks it's a little bit off? Also, now that you've got a taste for what the rest of the video is going to bring, consider subscribing to the channel and clicking that little bell. Did you know that only 4% of you watching right now subscribe to the channel? It's so easy. It's just a little button click. We're almost halfway to 10,000 subscribers, and I know we'll get there soon. Thanks for all the support. I appreciate all of you. On to the next one. The Trace. The all-powerful Trace, a charm that is responsible for stopping witches and wizards under the age of 17 from practicing any magic while not supervised by the faculty of Hogwarts. It's this charm that functions as a plot point for several books, advancing Harry's storyline for him at sometimes all too convenient points in time. But how does it work? And is it at all consistent? The most explicit explanation of the Trace comes from Dumbledore, with Harry asking about several of Voldemort's first victims. These murders are also one of the key topics that people point to and yell, "Plot hole." Let's first take a look at the conversation with Dumbledore. Quote, "But how come the Ministry didn't realize that Voldemort had done all that to Morphin?" Harry asked angrily. "He was underage at the time, wasn't he? I thought they could detect underage magic." You are quite right. They can detect magic, but not the perpetrator. You will remember that you were blamed by the Ministry for the hover charm that was in fact cast by Dobby, growled Harry. This injustice still rankled. So, if you're under the age and you do magic inside an adult witch or wizard's house, the Ministry won't know? They will certainly be unable to tell who performed the magic, said Dumbledore, smiling slightly at the look of great indignation on Harry's face. They rely on witch and wizard parents to enforce their offspring's obedience well within their walls. End quote. What we see is a version of the Trace that's not quite as exact as we might have originally been led to believe. Instead of it quote-unquote tracing an individual witch or wizard, it monitors their general vicinity. Past that, the Trace doesn't really seem to do anything. It may notify the Ministry of Magic of some sort of infraction, but it appears to be up to the Ministry to enforce any laws around magical secrecy. I think the plot hole is really buried in this component, that the Ministry of Magic is not at all consistent with enforcing their laws. Harry seems to catch the blunt of every law. He's persecuted for the most minor infractions, even when he isn't the perpetrator.
So I think part of this too is I think even Filch talks about it in the fifth book, is the fact that during his trial he goes, yes, the Potter situation has always been closely monitored. Like when they find out that there is a squib living on Little Whinging, and he was like, we have no magical person on record in Little Whinging because we've always monitored that situation. Which means they probably kept a closer eye on Harry and the goings-ons. Goings-on? Yeah, goings-on in Little Whinging. So, yeah. I mean, he might get to that point, but yeah, Tom Riddle was a nobody at the time. So it makes sense that, maybe he wasn't being monitored. But they knew that there was a muggle hater in that vicinity, and we don't know what the range of how close the trace works. Like, is it 100 yards? Is it a couple, is it a mile? Like, how big is the range for the trace? We don't know. So it could see some magic happen in that area with an underage wizard, and they're like, oh, well, Morphin Gaunt lives over there. And then when they go investigate, they see Morphin's wand says, oh, yeah, he performed this magic. Maybe there was just an underage wizard in the town at the time near the incident, and that's what set off the trace.
In the case of Dobby hovering some pudding at the Dursleys' house, this is such a minor spell to cause the infraction, but it isn't really clear why this is different than any other underage witch or wizard practicing magic in their own home. The Weasleys are a prime example, though I didn't really find any exact quotes. I'm almost positive there are examples of the Weasley children performing magic while in the burrow over the summer. And honestly, why shouldn't they? It's a bit like a student driver's license. Kids should be able to practice under the supervision of their parents, just like Dumbledore tells Harry. So instead, we're left wondering if somehow the presence of muggles might be the underlying factor. The Weasleys are able to practice little bits of magic here or there because they belong to a pureblood family. Arthur also works at the ministry, that might help. Basically, they have privileges that others might not have.
No, that's not at all what it is. It's not because Arthur works at the ministry that his kids are allowed to do magic and where Harry's not. It's they don't know it. The trace does not tell you who's performing the magic. It just says that magic is being performed. Like the trace just basically notifies that magic is being performed within the vicinity of an underaged wizard. So, if something's not right, I think that's where it goes. I don't know my alphabet apparently. X. No, that's not X. This. I've been putting W's in the wrong place. That's part of the problem. Okay. I think I put another W in the wrong place. We'll find it. Is it this one? It was this one. Okay. But yeah, the trace doesn't tell you who's doing the magic. It just tells you that magic is being performed around a minor or an underage wizard. So, if there's other magical people around, then it's safe to assume that it probably was not the underaged wizard. If it's just muggles, then yeah, it's safe to assume that it was the underage wizard. And then you're probably saying, but what about the Dobby situation? Well, yeah, house elves are not people. The ministry does not see them as people. And even if they did, they probably wouldn't have. That would have probably been like, the trace must be on the fritz if Harry wouldn't have a house elf in his house. That's crazy.
Harry is surrounded by muggles, so it might make sense that the trace would flag any magic done around him. Except, he isn't the only magical child that practices magic around muggles. Think back to one of the first scenes on the train in Philosopher's Stone. It's our first interaction with Hermione, who opens by chastising Ron while he waves his wand around. Quote, "Are you sure that's a real spell?" said the girl. "Well, it's not very good, is it? I've tried a few simple spells just for practice, and it's all worked for me. Nobody in my family's magic at all. It was ever such a surprise when I got my letter, but I was ever so pleased. Of course, I mean, it's the very best school of witchcraft there is, I've heard. I've learned all our course books by heart, of course. I just hope it will be enough. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. Who are you?" End quote. So, Hermione, a witch born to two muggle parents, is able to practice magic at home without any consequences.
Because it's before she went to school and they don't penalize Harry for all the accidental magic that he does before he goes to Hogwarts either. Because they talk about that. They're like, yeah, Harry does a bunch of accidental magic. Because even when he blew up his aunt, they're like, "Well, we're not going to send you to Azkaban for blowing up your aunt. We all get mad occasionally." What letter is this? This is PQR. So yeah, that's a silly one. Assuming, oh, it's, well, Hermione was able to do magic. Why can't Harry get away with it? It's like, because the trace probably isn't activated until you go to Hogwarts. There's probably something that activates the trace when you get to Hogwarts.
What
Maybe when you put
gives?
the hat on.
For some of these plot holes, I'm going to give my best attempt at an explanation, or at the very least, what some people believe to be the explanation. But as a warning, by nature of these being plot holes, these answers might not satisfy everyone. The best explanation I can come up with is that for 90% of the cases of underage magic usage, it does not trigger any consequences if the magic usage is in private and around non muggles. So, for families like the Weasleys, it just really doesn't matter. Your parents are in charge and they supervise you. The exception to this rule must be for muggle born witches and wizards. It's stated elsewhere that if you are a muggle born witch or wizard, you get a special envoy that comes to your house to explain to your muggle parents everything about the magical world. I would have to assume that they would be put on a list of muggles that are allowed to witness magic without triggering the trace. But none of that really explains Harry, and after all this research, I have to conclude that J.K. Rowling used the trace
Something's
as a
in the wrong
convenient
spot.
way to advance the plot for Harry, or place constraints on him over the summer to prevent any action from happening while the readers weren't reading. Battle of Seven Potters. Let's transition away from the trace to something tangentially related, the Battle of Seven Potters. To tie it together, Mad-Eye Moody explains the need for them to fly on brooms in the following scene with Harry. Quote, the trace, said Mad-Eye impatiently.
That was
a
awful.
charm that detects magical activity around under 17s, the way the Ministry finds out about underage magic. If you, or anyone around you, casts a spell to get you out of here, Thickness is going to know about it, and so will the Death Eaters. End quote. So that sets the stage. Harry is about to turn 17 when the members of the Order of the Phoenix show up at the Dursleys to whisk him away. And their plan, to secretly get him out of there in the dead of night, have everyone dress up as Harry and make it as obvious as possible that they're fleeing directly into a swarm of Death Eaters. The section from the book as they take off, quote, higher and higher they climbed into the sky, and then, out of nowhere, out of nothing, they were surrounded. At least 30 hooded figures, suspended in midair, formed a vast circle in the midst of which the Order members had risen. End quote. I get that it wasn't a secret. If I remember correctly, Snape leaks the plan to Voldemort, but the manner in which they try to escape seems so unnecessary. And Moody decides they will all disguise themselves as Harry, and
We talked about this a little bit last week on last week's stream about this. And it's just, I understand the Seven Potters. There's probably other ways they could have done it, but I think they also just wanted it to be known that, hey, because they could have done it in secret and nobody would have known, but I think they wanted it to be known that Harry was no longer there, which means if they were kind of keeping track of the Dursleys for just that small moment, then at that point they're not going to hunt down the Dursleys because clearly the Dursleys do not know where Harry is. If they it's just, there had to have been an idea of just, hey, let's just make sure that they, like, the Death Eaters don't know where Harry is going at all, ever. Like, hey, they're going this way, and then it's like, okay, but we don't know if they're actually still there. So it makes sense for the idea of they may just have done that to make sure that it was known that Harry has left Privet Drive. But also at the same time, yeah, there are other ways that they could have done it that were probably a lot safer and, wouldn't have gotten so many, well, not so many people killed. Could only one person actually, died in that situation. But that's partially because Mundungus screwed up. But it is kind of silly to think that this is the worst way they could have done it. It's like, it's not entirely the worst way that they could have done this situation because I think they wanted to make a spectacle because they knew there were going to be Death Eaters watching. They did not know that every Death Eater was going to be there, but they thought, okay, maybe there's going to be like one or two Death Eaters watching the house. We all come up. They don't know which Potter went where, and they see 7 Potters scattered to the wind, and then they're going to be like, well, I don't know where they went because I didn't know which one was the real one. So, but at that point, they know, okay, Potter has been moved, but we don't know where. It just kind of happened that the Death Eaters found out about the plan because that was also part of the plan. So, you know, it makes sense, but also at the same time, it is a very asinine plan. I will get behind the fact that it's a silly plan, but I think letting the Death Eaters know that Harry is no longer there or associated with the Dursleys kind of also protected the Dursleys. So, it wasn't just about protecting Harry, it was about protecting the Dursleys and also making it harder for them to find because yeah, if they snuck out, maybe they wouldn't have known where they were, but then they would probably know to hunt down the Dursleys.
And fly away. But it seems to me like there were so many other options. We know a flu network, portkeys, and apparating from the Dursleys is out of the question. The book tells us as much. Quote, Pius Thickness has gone over, which gives us a big problem. He's made it an imprisonable offense to connect this house to the flu network, place a portkey here, or apparate in or out. End quote. But I have 2 problems with this. Harry is going off on his own. Does it really matter if he commits an imprisonable offense? It feels as though none of that matters in the middle of a war. But secondly, why not take a more subtle approach? They are clearly able to use polyjuice potions without triggering the trace, so why not turn Harry into like a random muggle or something? Further, and maybe I'm wrong, but Harry should have just used his cloak of invisibility, right? Why not just throw it over your head, walk a mile or 2 down the road, and then use a portkey hidden in the bushes? The only reasonable explanation I can think of for any of this is that it's written as an exciting plot point that gives J.K. Rowling a chance to expand upon the wand lore between Voldemort and Harry. Without it, we don't quite have the foreshadowing and build up to the wand betrayal that happens at the end of the book. Otherwise, maybe Harry should have just tunneled down through the Dursleys' floor like he was escaping a prison cell. If he went that way, maybe Hedwig would still be alive. Werewolf process.
Also, the Hedwig being alive thing, I looked it up. Snowy owls, you know how long they live? 7 years. 7 years. Snowy owls live a total of 7 years. So, even if Hedwig hadn't have been killed during the Battle of the Seven Potters, Hedwig probably would not have made it through the end of the book because she was already extremely old. And I understand magical creatures live a lot longer than that, but still, 7 years. We do not know how old Hagrid, we do not know how old Hedwig was when Hagrid bought her for Harry. So, it is safe to assume she's at least a year old. You know, they have to probably train the owls, make sure that they're, can survive before they sell them to people to be sent as messengers. So, yes, it was sad that Hedwig died, but Hedwig was old. And I'm not excusing the fact that Hedwig died. I was sad when Hedwig died. It basically the symbolism of, this is Harry's youth. He's leaving his home, and everything that he had when he lived in the Dursleys is now gone. His childhood is officially over. And I think it was a good, it was portrayed as a loss of innocence, which I think was a very good allegory. Allegory? No, allegory has to do with biblical. A very good metaphor.
Let's move now to a storyline that's pivotal to Book 3, but seems like it could have been entirely avoided just by checking the calendar or wearing a bulky sweatshirt. Remus Lupin is famously allergic to the full moon, or rather, he's affected by lycanthropy, the disease that transforms you into a werewolf during the full moon. You'll remember the group has just captured Peter Pettigrew and are making their way back from the Shrieking Shack, out from under the Whomping Willow. Here's where the scene picks up. Quote, a cloud shifted. There were suddenly dim shadows on the ground. Their party was bathed in moonlight. Snape collided with Lupin, Pettigrew, and Ron, who had stopped abruptly. Black froze. He flung out one arm to make Harry and Hermione stop. Harry could see Lupin's silhouette. He'd gone rigid. Then his limbs began to shake. Oh my, Hermione gasped. He didn't take his potion tonight. He's not safe. Run, Black whispered. Run now. But Harry couldn't run. Ron was chained to Pettigrew and Lupin. He leapt forward, but Black caught him around the chest and threw him back. Leave it to me. Run! There was a terrible snarling noise. Lupin's head was lengthening, so was his body. His shoulders were hunching. Hair was sprouting visibly on his face and hands, which were curling into clawed paws. Crookshank's hair was on end again. He was backing away. As the werewolf reared, snapping its long jaws, Sirius disappeared from Harry's side. He had transformed. The enormous bear-like dog bounded forward. As the werewolf wrenched itself free of the manacle binding it, the dog seized it about the neck and pulled it backward, away from Ron and Pettigrew. They were locked, jaw to jaw, claws ripping at each other. End quote. Here we see Lupin out and about on the evening of a full moon.
One thing I do have to say, this video is way longer than it needs to be because the quotes that this guy's pulling are like 8 lines too long. Like, why are we talking about Sirius going after, like, transforming? Like, what does that have to do with Remus? You could have just used the line where it's like Remus turned to the moon, or turned when he saw the moon. But it's, and I think partially the problem with this is because of the way it's portrayed in the movie, where the clouds move out from the moon. It never gives you an exact time on when the werewolf changes. Does the werewolf change at high moon? Or does the werewolf change as soon as the moon rises? Because, fun fact, full moons usually rise before it's even nighttime. So there may be a small inconsistency in when it is, but I would assume it's probably moonrise that, or moon, not moonrise, not full moon, high moon. So it may be at a certain time of night. Yep. So it's one of those things. It's like in the movie, yeah, it was just kind of slightly over the. It wasn't directly overhead, but I think in the book it's kind of described as if it were overhead. So it's a weird little inconsistency in that, but to me, it makes sense that the werewolf changes at high moon and goes until like moonset, which I think is probably like 6 hours after high moon. High moon, I think, is usually around like 10 o'clock, 6 hours. So, it makes a little bit more sense that way. But, what do I know? Let me ask. Echo, during a full moon, when is it normally high moon?
A full moon reaches its highest point around midnight. Did you have a specific full moon in mind?
No. When does a full moon usually set?
A full moon typically sets around 6 a.m.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so there we go. Midnight to 6 a.m., which I think is a perfectly reasonable, time frame for a werewolf. Is at midnight, it transforms.
And I don't know about you, but if I was afflicted with a disease that turned me into a murderous monster during a very regular and predictable cycle, you better bet that I would mark it on my calendar as do not go outside if you do not want to go on a rampage. And I say this because I think.
So he's saying that Remus Lupin, who thought Peter Pettigrew was dead, is kind of there to protect Harry and sees that Sirius just kidnapped not only Harry's best friend, but a guy who he thought was dead, isn't going to be like, I know I probably shouldn't leave my office because I should never leave my office during a full moon, but yeah, I'm not going to investigate that, seeing as I'm the only one who knows about it. Yeah, of course. Why would he do that?
I think this is the biggest part of the plot hole. What actually causes his transformation? This arc in particular, and really the origins of the Marauders' Animagus forms, is built around the fact that they had to keep Lupin company and make sure he didn't hurt anyone while in werewolf form. A quick reminder for something that isn't a plot hole, despite questions some of you might have: lycanthropy is not transmissible or contagious if you're in an animagus form. So the fact that Sirius is bitten by a werewolf but doesn't turn into one is not a plot hole, though it does seem a little bit convenient. But, and it's a big but, this section of the text makes it pretty clear that he transforms as he comes in contact with the light from a full moon, and not from the mere timing of the full moon. In other words, prior to this whole sequence of events, the moon was already full. It's just hidden behind clouds. When Lupin is down in the shack with everyone, the moon is full. It doesn't just become full as the clouds part. So, if that's the case, it seems like he could have protected himself from the light of the full moon. An umbrella, a thick cloak, any type of light-blocking spell seems like it would have done the trick. Frankly, I'm confused as to why or how Lupin allows himself.
So, 100%, this is well, the movie did it, so it must be this way, even though I think it has been established, at least on this channel, that the movies are not canon to the book ideas. Some things are better cinematic, which is exactly what some of the plot holes are in this series that people keep pointing out. Is it's like, yeah, the moon being invisible, I think, could be a problem. But you know what? It makes it makes the movie look better when the clouds part, and then it's like, hey, the moon is here. Now he's turning into a werewolf. It's a cinematic thing.
To go anywhere on that day of the month. I get that he has to live his life, but so do other people that don't want to be attacked by a werewolf. Maybe just stay inside, close the curtains, and watch Netflix for an evening? I don't know. Dates. If there's one thing you'll find as you start reading about J.K. Rowling and her writing process, it's that she's terrible at math. And, apparently, looking at the calendar. There are a number of situations throughout the series that make absolutely no sense or are otherwise impossible as soon as you start looking back at the previous year and the days of the week. As far as plot holes go, I'd rate this pretty low as it doesn't really disturb you while you're in the middle of reading, but nonetheless, this is a video about plot holes, so I need to at least mention a couple. The first and most common one that you will likely find people pointing out is the first day of school. According to every source I can find, the school semester starts on September 1st. That is, the Hogwarts Express explicitly boards at precisely 11 a.m. on September 1st. And after arriving to Hogwarts, that evening involves the sorting of the first-year students, followed presumably by the first day of classes the next day. The only problem is, September 1st isn't always on the same day of the week. It changes every year, just like every other date on the calendar. So, instead of being fixed to a day of the week, like, for example, if the Hogwarts Express boarded at 11 a.m. on the first Sunday of September or something, we have a train that boards on Sunday one year and then...
I mean, this has already been talked about, not on this video, but just for convenience of story, it's a lot easier for September 1st to be Sunday and classes start the next day on Monday. Yes, it doesn't make sense. Is it a plot hole? No, because it doesn't actually cause an issue in the story. It's more just to, hey, it's easier than having to figure out the date, and it keeps it a little bit more timeless. Because, yes, it's supposed to... It is not dated. Like, we don't know what the year is until I think we see Lillian James's gravestone. I think that's the first moment that we fully find out what the year is. Because from that point, we can figure out every other year based on, oh, hey, so Lillian James died at this point. They had Harry on this day because he was this old. All right. They graduated school at this time, and they went to school with Snape, which means Snape's the same age, which means they all started at this time. At this point, Lucius Malfoy was already in his 5th year. Okay. So that means Lucius Malfoy is this old. All right. So it's kind of one of those things. For a while, we didn't know what the dates were. And that's okay. To call it a plot hole, it's other than that, it's very timeless because it didn't matter what the day of the week was or what the month is. It's not a plot hole. It doesn't cause a problem in the plot for it to be September 1st on Sunday every year. Bottom line. All right.
and boards on Monday the next. So either the students at Hogwarts don't get weekends, or I guess it's always possible that they might get a short break if the train picks them up on a Friday, for example. This might be more informed by British boarding school culture, so if you know anything about that, feel free to let me know in the comments. The second example that I think is a little funnier actually happens on the very first page of the very first book. The series begins by following the point of view of Vernon Dursley on his way to and from work. Quote, "When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull, gray Tuesday our story starts, there was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country." End quote. There's only one problem. It's not Tuesday. It's Sunday. We know this because Harry is about to arrive that evening, the night after his parents are murdered by Voldemort. And we know that date because Hagrid tells us, quote, "Maybe he thought he could persuade him. Maybe he just wanted him out of the way. All anyone knows is he turned up in the village where you was all living on Halloween 10 years ago. You was just a year old. He came to your house and end quote. And this one you can look up for yourself. October 31st of 1981 was a Saturday, which means Vernon is going to work on a Sunday. A plot hole made even more glaring because of the fact that Vernon is famously home on the weekends, enjoying the fact that there is no post on Sundays. And with that, let's move down to level 2.
Once again, it makes things convenient. If you're looking at the dates, at that point, the dates were not set on what year it was. It was just an unnamed year because it didn't have to have a date. We just knew it was the day after Halloween, and that's it.
Bill the Secret Keeper. Now that we're into level 2, we can really get into the meat of it. I'm talking about pivotal plot holes that really undermine the entire series. Among them are the underpinnings of Harry's entire backstory, his existence as a Horcrux, and really, the murder of the Potters to begin with. Amongst the spells and tools in the Wizarding universe, there are a few that exist as sort of Deus Machina type spells. Spells that are sort of coveralls for plot points. Things that solve all problems.
Sorry, it's Deus Ex Machina, not just Deus Machina. Sorry. If you're going to use Latin, use it right. Also, he's going to say, well, why did the Potters have to have a different secret keeper if they could be their own? It was the point of pride on James that, he wanted to show that he trusted his friends. That's why he made them secret keepers. Plus, also, if you're being hunted, you don't want to be the one who is coming out of your house or passing notes. Because if you come out of your house, you can't be... You have to give it willingly. It can't be tortured or veritaserumed or even legilimized out of your head, the location. But if you're being hunted, you're not going to come out of your house to give information. But if you give a note, the notes can be intercepted. So it's probably safer to give it to someone who's outside of the house. You make them the secret keeper. They can pass the secret to other people, as Pettigrew did, but it allows you to stay safe within your house if your secret keeper is a trusted friend. Unfortunately, they shouldn't have trusted Peter Pettigrew. So therein lies the problem. Not, oh, hey, Bill Weasley couldn't have been his own secret keeper. Arthur couldn't have been his own secret keeper. That's not how secret keepers work. And it's like, that's kind of exactly how secret keepers work. But okay.
Problems and explain away any questions. A few that come to mind are the Cloak of Invisibility, the Time Turner, and of course, the Fidelius Charm. A charm so powerful that it would render the subject entirely unfindable, no matter what. The one downfall of this charm was the requirement that there be a secret keeper. It's the one weak point in this otherwise unbreakable cone of secrecy. In the Deathly Hallows, we see the gang at Shell Cottage when they are interrupted by a surprise visitor, Lupin. Quote, "There was a bang on the front door. Everyone's head turned toward it. Fleur came running out of the kitchen looking frightened. Bill jumped to his feet, his wand pointing at the door. Harry, Ron, and Hermione did the same. Silently, Griphook slipped beneath the table, out of sight. 'Who is it?' Bill called. 'It is I, Remus John Lupin,' called a voice over the howling wind. Harry experienced a thrill of fear. What had happened? 'I am a werewolf, married to Nymphadora Tonks, and you, the secret keeper of Shell Cottage, told me the address and bade me come in an emergency.' End quote. Did you catch that tiny line? You, the secret keeper of Shell Cottage? If Bill had never revealed the secret, there'd be no way for anyone to ever find Shell Cottage. Bill also tells them just one chapter earlier that Arthur Weasley is the secret keeper for a Fidelius charm on the Burrow. So why, then, couldn't Lily or James Potter have been their own secret keepers for their own house in Godric Hollow? It would have left no weak point that could have been exploited by Voldemort. They would have been safe.
See, this is what exactly what I was saying. It's like, how can he be the secret keeper of his own house? It's like, because that's how it works. You become the secret keeper of the location, and then you call it a nice day. There we are. Also, Arthur wasn't the secret keeper for the burrow. He was the secret keeper for Auntie Muriel's.
For as long as they need it. I guess one question I'm left with that might explain this plot hole is that we don't really know how far the protection of the charm extends. How large of an area can you protect? Could you hide a single person's existence? An entire city? I would assume you have to have ownership. Otherwise, you could theoretically place a Fidelius charm around the entire Earth, and then I don't know what would happen. It'd be like spraying mosquito spray on a mosquito. So maybe the Potters could have protected their own house, but they would have been exposed every time they went out to get groceries. Maybe they would have just had to magically DoorDash their food forever? Uber Wizard? Magic Dash? Magic Dash actually doesn't sound too bad. Peter Pettigrew's handcuffs. At the risk of some of these sounding just like complaints, let's talk a little bit more about Peter Pettigrew. He was a sort of nexus for the whole host of problems that happened throughout the series, and he plays a pivotal role in resurrecting Voldemort. Without Wormtail, there just wouldn't be a living, breathing Voldemort. So, why then, when the group has him captured, are they so laxed about keeping him secured? They use handcuffs, of all things, to make sure he doesn't get away. Now, let's imagine for a second that you've just captured Wormtail. Pretend you're Sirius or Lupin. You know Peter Pettigrew, you know what he's capable of. At the very least, he's mastered Animagus magic, which is described as being pretty difficult to do. I think
he hasn't mastered Animagus magic, so this whole thing is going to be moot because of the fact that a master of Animagus magic can change without their wand. So Sirius can change without his wand. McGonagall can change without her wand. I'm sure James could. And some cases, I think it was talked about in Pottermore that Peter Pettigrew had to be helped. Like, so James or Sirius had to turn him into the mouse because he couldn't perform the spell himself. So Peter Pettigrew was not a master animagus. He eventually was able to, use magic to turn himself into a rat, as we see, but in most cases, he struggled to do that. So to say, oh, well, he could have done it without his wand, that was why they weren't so worried about, oh, hey, we're going to put him into handcuffs because he couldn't get a wand. But when the other guy next to him in the handcuffs turned into a werewolf, he was kind of able to take Ron's wand that was trained on him because Ron was a little bit distracted by a werewolf. I think no matter what you put him in, Ron would have been a little bit distracted by a werewolf.
the audience, and apparently Sirius and Lupin, tend to underestimate Peter Pettigrew. He is, after all, a right-hand man of Voldemort. I don't think Voldemort would pick a bad or unskilled wizard to be that important in his organization. Think of Snape, for example. Snape is an incredibly skilled wizard. It would make sense that Peter is at least competent enough to magic his way out of some handcuffs.
Peter was a servant of Voldemort for the purpose of he gave him very vital information on how to find the Potters. He was the unexpected spy for Voldemort on the Order of the Phoenix. He was the one passing the information because nobody thought Peter was brave enough or smart enough to think about it. He's not a skilled wizard. Even Sirius and Remus talk about how he wasn't a skilled wizard. He just kind of attached himself to skilled wizards and took advantage of their skills.
Let's go to the scene in question. The group is making their way back from the Shrieking Shack when Lupin begins to transform and Peter makes his move. Quote, Pettigrew had dived for Lupin's dropped wand. Ron, unsteady on his bandaged leg, fell. There was a bang, a burst.
Sorry, I was wrong when I said Ron's wand. I think he steals Ron's wand in the movie. Maybe in the book. I don't know. But they used Lupin's wand, who was busy being turned into a werewolf, so still my point stands. It makes sense.
Of light, and Ron lay motionless on the ground. Another bang. Crookshanks flew into the air and back to the earth in a heap. Expelliarmus, Harry yelled, pointing his own wand at Pettigrew. Lupin's wand flew high into the air and out of sight. Stay where you are, Harry shouted, running forward. Too late. Pettigrew had transformed. Harry saw his bald tail whip through the manacle of Ron's outstretched arm and heard a scurrying through the grass. There was a howl and a rumbling growl. Harry turned to see the werewolf taking flight. It was galloping into the forest. Sirius, he's gone. Pettigrew transformed, Harry yelled. End quote. Why, on God's green earth, would they only use handcuffs? Why not stupefy him, or otherwise bind him with some sort of spell? You have Lupin, an Auror, and Sirius Black, an incredibly talented...
Did he just call Lupin an Auror? Lupin's not an Auror. Where would he get Lupin being an Auror? I'm losing faith in this gentleman who made this video. Lupin's not an Auror. He works for the Order of the Phoenix, and he's probably good enough to become one, but he would have never been hired by the Ministry because of his being a werewolf. Even though the Ministry could have used probably an Auror within the werewolf community to probably take down Fenrir Greyback, because that's one thing that they really wanted to get rid of, is Fenrir, who was attacking children and worked for Voldemort during the First Wizarding War, and also in the Second.
Talented duelist and wizard, and they don't think to restrain someone they know is an animagus that turns into a small rat? They could have avoided basically everything from Book 4 onwards by just knocking him out. Honestly, I think I just need to move on before I get more annoyed. Mad Eye Moody's Mad Eye. I mentioned it once before, the invisibility cloak. It functions in a way that gives Harry the ability to walk around anywhere and observe without being noticed. That said, once you introduce a powerful object like this into the magical world, you have to find ways to counter it. Otherwise, it would become the go-to solution for everything. It is obviously a powerful magical artifact, but how powerful is it? Dumbledore can apparently see right through it with a simple spell. We'll wave that one away and just attribute it to Dumbledore.
When did it ever say in the book that Dumbledore could see through the invisibility cloak with a simple spell? I don't think it ever said that Dumbledore could see through it. I do have a theory that Legilimens can sense the person's mind who is in the invisibility cloak. That could also explain why Severus Snape had the ability to almost find Harry most times he was even under the cloak, because he could sense Harry's mind. But to say that Dumbledore could use a simple spell to see under the cloak is very wrong. But okay. But he also thinks Remus is an Auror.
Being a very powerful wizard. But then we come to another person that can see through the cloak, Mad Eye Moody. I guess it isn't really him who can see through the cloak, as it is his magical eye. What's the deal with that? Quite honestly, the backstory of his eye is never expanded on. We know that he lost his eye in a duel with a Death Eater, but we don't know how the eye was created, who created it, or even the extent of its powers. Because of a complete lack of substantiated information on the eye, instead, there are a few fan theories that seem to come up pretty often as you research. First is the idea that Moody made the eye himself. He is a powerful wizard, after all. It might make sense that a powerful wizard would be able to create a powerful tool for himself. I only have one issue with this, though. I'm not sure this would necessarily be in his wheelhouse. I guess it's a general issue I have with Harry Potter as a whole, is that there aren't many specialists. Outside of the professors that teach a specific subject, every witch and wizard can do a bit of everything, and nothing seems to be outside the reach of anyone with enough practice. There are exceptions, of course, but the most powerful characters can pretty much do anything. Unlike a series where maybe a duelist or warrior character would have absolutely no skill in potions, if you're powerful enough in the Harry Potter world, you can do anything. It would just feel more realistic if Moody wouldn't have been able to make his own charmed artifact. But going off that is probably the most common theory, that the eye was created in collaboration with Dumbledore and the Elder Wand. Dumbledore also gets the free pass of being able to do any type of magic he wants just because he's Dumbledore. That said, this one tends to hold a little bit more weight for me purely for the fact that the Elder Wand is involved. And maybe that's why Moody's eye is able to see through the cloak. Only something imbued with the power of a Deathly Hallow could bypass the powers of another Deathly Hallow. The most hand-waving theory, however, is that the eye itself is just some ancient magical artifact, something as old as the Deathly Hallows, just unnamed. These solutions are always so
See, I think the fact that he's calling the Mad-Eye Moody's eye a plot hole because it can see through an invisibility cloak is kind of misconstrued in the fact that it doesn't really matter. I think it's cool that there are some magical objects that, you know, we don't know the origin about, we don't know where they came from, like who made them. I think that's fun with the world building of we don't have to know every single detail of what is the origin of this. Would it be fun? Yes, but that's where fan theories come in. It's like, oh, well, maybe it's an ancient artifact like that's created kind of that's really powerful magic like the Hallows, or the simple explanation of, oh, Dumbledore made it for him. you know I also don't understand why he's mad that, oh, maybe Mad Eye Moody made it. It's like, okay, he's a powerful wizard. What makes you think he couldn't have made it? So that one's a silly one.
satisfying to me, though. You could say that about anything to satisfy the reader, but it doesn't make it a good answer, especially in a series and a universe with magic. It's kind of like hitting the easy button. Oh, it can see through Harry's cloak because it's got old magic in it. I don't buy it. Deadly children's puzzles. 7 puzzles stand between you and the Philosopher's Stone. And by puzzles, I mean basically kids' games. The best and brightest professors have been tasked with protecting the Philosopher's Stone, an artifact that can demonstrably grant immortality. And the best they can come up with is a big dog, some ivy, a locked door, some chess, a troll, and a brain teaser. Who are these puzzles actually made to keep out? Students? Dumbledore knows that he's protecting the stone from Voldemort, so what's the point of these puzzles? I mean, if any random student stumbled upon Fluffy, it literally would have eaten them. So I guess Hagrid would have succeeded in stopping an intruder and also in killing a student. But I sincerely doubt Fluffy would have stopped an adult wizard that had the knowledge of and intention to steal the Philosopher's Stone, let alone Voldemort. If I'm honest, the hardest puzzle for most people probably would have been the chess game. But one thing I'm curious about here is if someone could have brute forced their way through these puzzle rooms. If someone went into the chess room and just started blasting, would it really have been able to stop them? What about the flying wings room? Alohomora wouldn't work on the door, but I feel like some kind of big explosion could have done the trick. Then there's the troll. It was left out of the movie, probably because of how short of a section in the books it was. By the time the gang gets there, Quirrell has already dispatched it. Quote, a disgusting smell filled their nostrils, making both of them pull their robes up over their noses. Eyes watering, they saw, flat on the floor in front of them, a troll even larger than the one they had tackled, out cold with a bloody lump on its head. I'm glad we didn't have to fight that one, Harry whispered, as they stepped carefully over its massive legs. Come on, I can't breathe. End quote. And then we have the potions puzzle room. Again, it feels like a powerful wizard could have just used some other kind of defensive spell and walked through the black fire. That said,
I definitely feel like this person read through Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. Yeah, Methods of Rationality. Because that is something that happens in the book where instead of, actually doing the challenges, just brute forces his way through every single challenge and it doesn't matter. And it's just kind of like, oh yeah, Voldemort would have just blown his way through unless he was trying to be subtle, get to the stone, steal the stone, and get out of there and continue teaching and nobody know that he got there. The only reason it kind of got figured out was the fact that Harry put all the pieces together and it just happened to be the same night because Dumbledore just happens to not be there.
Snape was actually a powerful wizard, so it's possible that the Black Flame was actually really dangerous. This was omitted from the movie as well. Here are the clues again if you want to try to pause and figure it out for yourself. Quote, danger lies before you while safety lies behind. Two of us will help you, whichever you would find. One among us seven will let you move ahead. Another will transport the drinker back instead. Two among our number hold only nettle wine. Three of us are killers, waiting bidden in line. Choose unless you wish to stay here forevermore. To help you in your choice, we will give you these clues 4. First, however slyly the poison tries to hide, you will always find some on nettle wine's left side. Second, different are those who stand at either end, but if you would move onward, neither is your friend. Third, as you see clearly, all are different size. Neither dwarf nor giant holds death in their insides. Fourth, the second left and second on the right are twins once you taste them, though different at first sight. Okay, 3, 2, 1, time's up. It was the smallest bottle. If you got it, congrats. That also means any random witch or wizard probably could have figured it out as well. Not a great puzzle, Snape. And that lands us at what is probably the only actually effective puzzle, Dumbledore's. I don't know that I really realized the success criteria for the puzzle with the Mirror of Erised when I first read it 20 years ago, but apparently you'd only be able to get the stone if you saw yourself with it in the mirror and had no intention to use it. I'll give it to...
You don't see yourself in the mirror with it. It was, you can only get it out of the mirror if you seek to find it and not use it. So probably the only two people who were seeking to find the Sorcerer's Stone, Philosopher's Stone, and not use it would have probably been Dumbledore and Harry. If at any point you were like, "Whoo, the magic of this stone could make me live forever and be extremely rich," I would want it. So, like, if Ron stood in front of the mirror during that situation, he probably would have been like, "Cool, if I can get a hold of this, I could use it." And probably would not have been able to unlock the power of the mirror. So it's the fact that Harry didn't care about what it actually did. He just wanted to make sure that Voldemort could not access that power. So I think he's looking too deep into these challenges. The challenges weren't actually supposed to be that hard. They were supposed to be easy for Harry to be able to get through because Dumbledore wanted Harry to face Voldemort. Because I've always stood by this, is the fact that Dumbledore, when Harry goes, "Well, what about Nicholas Flamel?" Dumbledore didn't go, why do you know about Nicholas Flamel? Dumbledore was like, oh, you really did do the whole thing. Because he didn't think Harry would go and do the research on what he was getting. He probably thought, oh, Harry is literally just going to go down there and get through all the challenges and face Voldemort. He wanted Harry to face Voldemort. And Harry actually just did the research and he was surprised by it.
Dumbledore, that one would have stumped Voldemort, I'm sure. But that begs the question, what was the point of the other 6 puzzles that a bunch of 11-year-olds got through no problem? Have you ever met an 11-year-old? Why is your bar for protecting this stone so low? Thank God Harry was able to melt Quirrell with his bare hands, otherwise Voldemort would have walked in and out of there like he was taking a trip to the grocery store. Basilisk in the Pipes. This is probably the most annoying one on this entire iceberg to me, because it literally doesn't make any sense. The others you can kind of just explain away with magic, but this one is integral to the story, and yet I can't find any reasonable explanation for it. So, the Chamber of Secrets. Surely you remember the size of the basilisk, yes?
All right, first off, don't call me Shirley. Second off, you're saying remember the size of the basilisk in the movie. Yeah, the basilisk in the movie does not make sense that it's moving through the pipes because that thing is gigantic. For the snake to be like 10 feet wide in diameter, it would have to be, I think based on snake proportions, would have to probably be like 100 feet long. Yeah, you would see a great bloody serpent that big, and it wouldn't be able to fit through the pipes. But a snake, because I think the snake is about 50 feet long. The widest it probably would be is about 30 feet. Or not 30 feet. The widest it could be is about 3 feet. Which is still kind of big, but I think that's still a little bit more reasonable than it being as long as it is. It would be much bigger if it was as big as it was in the movie. Longer. So, the other thing is the movies had to be cinematic. If it was a tiny little serpent that was half the size of a 12-year-old kid, it wouldn't be as intimidating as the giant dragon-like creature that is twice the size of Harry, but probably like 20 feet long in actuality.
I will admit up front that I think the movie exaggerated the size of it. In the book, Harry describes the basilisk as being as thick as an oak trunk, and at least 20 feet long. That is, he sees the shed snakeskin that is at least 20 feet long. Quick side note, it's a little crazy when I go back and read these sections for quotes just how short some of these scenes are in the early books. I mean, this entire encounter with the basilisk is about a page and a half. From the point where the basilisk enters the chamber through the statue to the point where Harry stabs it through the roof of its mouth is less than 500 words. Most of the topics on this iceberg are longer than that. In my memory, all of these are just longer experiences than they actually are in the books. I can't be the only one. Anyways, so this snake is the size of an oak tree and at least 20 feet long. Now, the oldest oak trees I can find have a trunk diameter of around 10 feet. The biggest one I can find is called the Spooner Tree in Iron City, Georgia, with a diameter of almost 11 feet. So let's back it down a bit and call this snake about 8 feet thick. Or tall? I don't know how you...
But why are you looking at the oldest oak tree? I think a common oak tree that you would probably see normal places would be about 3 feet in diameter. Am I wrong? Like, you don't see a lot of giant oak trees. Like, I think you're trying to prove your point too hard, where, like, in actuality, Echo, what is the average size of an oak tree, like, in width on the trunk?
Oak trunks can get pretty big. On average, they're about 2 to 3 feet wide, but some can reach up to 10 feet or more in diameter.
Echo, stop. All right, so my point stands. 2 to 3 feet wide. So an average oak tree that normal people would see, 2 to 3 feet wide. So Harry's probably picturing, which is still big. I'm not faulting the fact that that oak tree is still pretty big, but to say, oh well, this one's about 8 feet wide, because I would look at an average size. But then again, this guy is clearly trying to find fault in it because it bothers him. But yeah, 20 feet long, 2 to 3 feet wide, which is the proper proportions for a snake. Because when I was looking up this plot hole a while back, I have a video for it, that's what it was. It, like, I looked at what is the longest snake in the world? How long is that snake? How wide is it? Okay, if you were to raise up that proportion to 20 feet, how wide would it be? And it was about 2 to 3 feet. 2.5, I think, is where the proportion was. So guess what? That's about the size of a trunk. That is a normal size snake. That is a very long snake, mind you, but he's half the size of Harry, who would probably be about 5 feet. So 2.5 feet wide is still a pretty damn big snake. But guess what? He could fit in pipes, at least sewage pipes, at least old sewage pipes in a castle. Yeah, it's not going to fit in your PVC pipes that you have in your house, but this is a castle. It's not going to have PVC pipe. It's probably going to have just, like, the toilets will probably be the smallest hole, maybe the faucets in the sink, but he's probably going through the sewage pipes, not the water pipes, which are going to be wider because they have to hold excrement. Back to the video.
Measure what size a snake is, but its body would be taller than you if you were standing next to it. Point is, it's a big snake. So how is it able to fit in the pipes and crawl around the school? I don't care what kind of school this is, it does not have 8-foot diameter pipes running through all the walls. Quote, "But how's the basilisk been getting around the place?" said Ron. "It's a dirty great snake. Someone would have seen..." Harry pointed toward the word Hermione had scribbled at the foot of the page. "Pipes," he said. "Pipes, Ron. It's been using the plumbing. I've been hearing that voice inside the walls." End quote. That's what Hermione figures out. But it just doesn't make any sense. Also, presumably the snake has to leave the pipes somehow in order to petrify its victims. How is it supposed to do that? The only possible explanation is that it comes out through the pipes in the girls' bathroom where the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets is. But then what? Have you ever tried to fit a sofa through a doorway? Those are only like 2.5 feet wide, not 8. There just isn't any world where there isn't obvious signs of the basilisk roaming around the school every evening. And even if the students aren't aware of what it is, you would think that...
So he answered his own question. Have you ever tried to fit a sofa through? They're about 2.5 feet wide. Actually, a sofa's about 3.5 feet wide. I don't know what kind of tiny sofa you're sitting on, but a 2.5 feet wide snake, guess what? Can fit through a doorway.
Dumbledore would be able to identify the signs of a monster that he knows lives somewhere beneath Hogwarts. There should be snake slime everywhere. Multiple people probably would have caught a glimpse of it at night.
I'm sorry, what is snake slime? Do you think snakes are slimy? They're not slugs. I'm sorry, this is going to be the Muggle cameras cannot be used because they're Muggle technology, even though they don't actually use any sort of electronics. Okay, anyway.
It probably would have knocked over everything in the hallways. You get it. Also, Harry hears the basilisk from a floor away. That must have been so loud to everyone else. Only Harry is able to interpret Parseltongue, but he heard it from a floor away. Other students and faculty would have heard extraordinarily loud hissing, right? And again, All these clues would have made their way back to Dumbledore. Hey Dumbledore, there's slime all over the hallways and students are hearing really loud hissing sounds. Probably nothing to be concerned about, right? Please, someone in the comments make the basilisk make sense to me. And I swear to God, if you tell me the snake just shrinks down with magic, I will lose it. If it turns into a tiny snake, then it wouldn't be dangerous anymore. You could just put a bucket on top of it. Okay, let's move down to level 3.
Which is an idea that has been poised in the internet, is that the basilisk could change its size and fit into other locations. And it wouldn't work if you put a bucket on it. I don't understand when they go, well, if it shrinks down, then it wouldn't be that scary. It can also get bigger. It can change sizes. So it can shrink to fit through things and expand. Normal snakes can do that too. Normal snakes can shrink to get under doors, even if they're not. I mean, mice do the same thing. So to be like, well, that's not possible is kind of silly to think, but whatever. A lot of these are very silly.
Mysterious thestral magic. Likely one of the most hotly debated topics in the series, thestrals seem simple at first, but lose that simplicity as soon as you think about it for more than 2 seconds. As we're told by Hagrid and Hermione, quote, "Don't worry, it won't hurt you," said Hagrid patiently. "Right, now, who can tell me why some of you can see 'em and some can't?" Hermione raised her hand. "Go on then," said Hagrid, beaming at her. "The only people who can see thestrals," she said, "are people who have seen death." "That's exactly right," said Hagrid solemnly. 10 points to Gryffindor. End quote. So, let's get the obvious plot hole topics out of the way first. Why doesn't Harry see the thestrals when he first gets to Hogwarts? I think this one is actually not so much a plot hole. I can understand the idea that he should have internalized his parents' death by that point, but he was also a baby. I'm okay drawing the line at the age where you can actually form memories. That seems fair. The bigger plot hole is, why doesn't Harry see them after Cedric Diggory dies in Book 4? The argument against this being a plot hole is that Harry has not fully comprehended Cedric's death by the time he left that year, that he was still processing, which is a fine argument, but it's undermined slightly when you have J.K. Rowling saying publicly that, quote, "Well, I didn't want to start a new mystery which would not be resolved for a long time at the end of the 4th book. I decided, therefore, that until Harry is over the first shock and really feels what death means, i.e. when he can fully appreciate that Cedric is gone forever and that he can never come back, which takes time, whatever age you are, he would not be able to see the thestrals. After 2 months away from school, during which he has dwelled endlessly on the memories of the murder and had nightmares about it, the thestrals have taken shape and form, and he can see them quite clearly." End quote. So, even though this is a somewhat satisfactory explanation, I'm still going to call it a bit of a plot hole. I get the feeling that the thestrals...
But at no point in the books, or the movies, but the books in particular, does it say that you instantaneously see thestrals as soon as you witness someone snuff it. It could probably take a little bit sooner, like if you're not close to the person, if you... It all goes together. Cool. There's probably all sorts of different reasoning on why they don't show up, because it never says, oh, if you see someone die, you instantly are able to see thestrals. If it did, let me know. But yes, and I understand someone may say, well, in the Hogwarts Legacy game, they see the guy in the carriage get eaten and they instantaneously see the thestrals. Well, yes and no. That's in Hogwarts Legacy, not in Harry Potter, so it's not a direct canon. But also, it's partially because at that point, the character was not like overly attached to the guy. So he probably was like, oh shit, that guy's dead. And didn't deny it. Where Harry was going through the stages of grief, I think you probably have to, like, if you're closer, you have to kind of figure out and go through it and, like, come to terms with, oh shit, he's dead. And that would explain why it took him a little while to see Thestrals in his 5th year. I don't have a problem with the fact that he didn't see Thestrals until his 5th year. Where's this one? Why is this just sitting here? C7. Right there. So, that's just me. And I'm sure it's going to be all the things. Okay, well, you know, it took him forever until he figured out Cedric. What about Quirrell? And yeah, I'm sure he's going to do the same
Were
rigmarole.
not fully formed ideas until book 5, and J.K. Rowling is justifying Harry's experience after writing the books. But that leaves us with one other question. What about after Harry dissolves Quirrell right in front of him?
Yep, there it
It's
is.
pretty clearly a death, isn't it? Why doesn't he see Thestrals after that? To which J.K. Rowling claims that Harry actually passed out before Quirrell died. And I'll be honest, if you go back and reread the chapter, it isn't really clear that Harry is what killed Quirrell. Dumbledore says that Voldemort abandoned Quirrell to die. So I think you can almost claim that it wasn't Harry that killed him, but rather Voldemort separating from his body that killed him. If that's the case, this is unfortunately not a plot hole. That said, I still don't really buy the whole Cedric thing. Crowing of a rooster. One of the smaller hidden details within the Chamber of Secrets is that there was actually a potentially very easy way for Harry to either completely avoid the basilisk or kill it, with almost no risk to himself. Here's the excerpt from the book. Quote, Hermione's hand was clamped so tightly around the paper that Harry was sure he was going to tear it. While Ron kept watch, he tugged and twisted, and at last, after several tense minutes, the paper came free. It was a page torn from a very old library book. Harry smoothed it out eagerly, and Ron leaned close to read it too. Of the many fearsome beasts and monsters that roam our land, there is none more curious or more deadly than the basilisk, known also as the king of serpents. This snake, which may reach gigantic sizes and live many hundreds of years, is born from a chicken's egg hatched beneath a toad. Its methods of killing are most wondrous, for, aside from its deadly and venomous fangs, the basilisk has a murderous stare, and all who are fixed with the beam of its eye shall suffer instant death. Spiders flee before the basilisk, for it is their mortal enemy, and the basilisk flees only from the crowing of the rooster, which is fatal to it. Harry confirms a few paragraphs later, quote, he scanned the page in his hand eagerly. The more he looked at it, the more it made sense. The basilisk flees only from the crowing of the rooster, which is fatal to it, he read aloud. Hagrid's roosters were killed, end quote. I mean, nothing gets past this kid. Am I right? Unfortunately...
So to point out the whole idea of the roosters, he already knows there's no roosters, so it's not like I'm gonna go equipped with a rooster. No, he kind of did it quickly. And then, you know, he wasn't planning on going down there. He was planning on killing Gilderoy Lockhart. Like, hey, by the way, it's down here. It's a basilisk. We know exactly where it is, how to find it, and what it is. And then they found out Lockhart was a garbage person, and they were like, oh, well, crap. I guess we'll go down because we're the ones who know all the information. We'll take Lockhart with us as a human shield. It's not like they were just like, oh yeah, we're gonna go down here. Let's go get a rooster. And also we know the roosters are all dead. It was more, the whole thing was more of a part of the clue of trying to figure out who did it. Because the entire time you're supposed to be thinking, all right, who's behind all of this? Because Percy is one of the suspects. Hagrid is one of the suspects. We also have Ginny is one of the suspects, and Draco Malfoy is one of the suspects. Well, actually, Ginny, I don't think is technically one of the suspects, but if you pay attention, she is kind of suspicious acting. You just think, oh, she's just nervous around Harry because she likes him. But in actuality, it's like, huh, she was around Hagrid's. Hagrid finds um uh his rooster's dead right afterward. Then you also have, that's where that goes. I think it's over here. There it is. Just make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, no, right here. All right. Then you also have when the diary shows up. It's kind of one of those things that's like, oh, you're supposed to think that she's just kind of scared because she's like, oh crap, I'm embarrassed because of the poem that I just had read for Harry. When in actuality, it was the fact that it was she just saw the diary and was like, crap, I don't want Harry to interact with that because I think it might be evil, and he also knows all my secrets. Um, so if you look at it, there are pieces to the puzzle throughout, and this was supposed to kind of be the you kind of figure if you can figure it out right at this point, you figure it out before you actually get down there and find out that it was Ginny.
Ginny did kill all the roosters, but that seems like a pretty small problem to solve if you're a wizard. Just conjure up another one. Surely McGonagall could have turned a teapot into a rooster for you to go fight the basilisk, right? I can just imagine how frustrating that would have been for Tom Riddle. The basilisk plops down into the chamber, and Harry starts fumbling with the sorting hat, and instead of pulling out a sword, he pulls out a rooster that immediately crows and kills the basilisk. I'm actually surprised I haven't seen any skits about this. 100 times Harry could have immediately solved all his problems with magic. I don't know. I'm sure it's somewhere. Gryffindor's Quidditch team. This one is pretty short and inconsequential, but this is a plot hole video, so I might as well bring it up, right? Quidditch, the sport that is sort of a big deal for the first few books and is then completely forgotten about. For good reason, I guess. They were busy fighting for their lives. Flying around on a broom looking for the snitch is probably not the greatest use of your time if you're trying to stop an evil mass murderer. That said, let's talk about Quidditch for a second. The whole sport just feels like it was an afterthought at every point in the book. Think about the Quidditch World Cup that happens at the start of Goblet of Fire. Victor Crumb is the seeker for his national team and is regarded as one of the best players in the world. Let me remind you at this point that he is 18 years old. Now, I understand it's entirely possible for an 18-year-old to be good at a sport, but there's such a huge difference between a high school athlete and an adult post-college professional athlete. It's like Quidditch is only allowed to be played by children. Speaking of which, why is the Gryffindor team made entirely of children? We have Harry as the most important role on the team as an 11-year-old. Oliver Wood is a 5th year, so 15 or 16, and he's the oldest kid on the team. I think Fred and George would have been 3rd years, so 13 years old. A couple other team members might be 14 or 15, but where are all the 7th years? Are they all just too busy to care about this game anymore? The more I think about it, the more I think this might be the answer to this plot hole. Even though, as a competitive person, I don't understand it, maybe the older students are just too busy to play. And because all the games are played internally at Hogwarts, the stakes just aren't that high. You would still expect these kids to do some sort of physical activity, though, right? Are there other wizard sports that we just never see? There must be.
So there's the house league, the inter-house league. It's like the varsity league. There are intramural leagues in Hogwarts. Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery. I understand that that is also not a canon game, but I feel like the fact that they added like an intramural team where it allows you to be, to play without being on the team, um, is kind of a cop out. But also at the same time, it makes sense. Like, there's probably a intramural league that they have, just because you're not on the team, but still, yeah, cool. The big boys aren't part of uh the game, but it's fine. I don't have a problem with the fact that, you know, the kids are it's just mostly kids on the Gryffindor Quidditch team, and there's not 6th and 7th years on there. Also, I'm pretty sure the reason uh Crumb is still at Durmstrang at the age of 18 is because he was being held back by Karkaroff to make sure that he was available during the during the Triwizard tournament, so he had the best chances to win that year. But yeah, that's just my opinion on the Crumb situation.
Maybe they all just play football too. Soccer, that is. A little game of footy, but with wands. So instead of slide tackling, you stupefy someone. Hogwarts student population. How many students are there at Hogwarts? It's a simple question, but you would never guess how wild the answer is. You see, J.K. Rowling was asked this question back in the early 2000s, and her quick response is that there are, quote, about 1,000 students at Hogwarts. 1,000. Okay, let's do a little math. We'll start top down. We know that there are 7 years of students at any given point in time, which means that each class should contain about 140 students. We also knew that there are 4 houses, and I would assume that the classes are divided somewhat evenly between those 4 houses. That gives us about 35 kids per house per year. Now let's think about what else we know. Harry's class contains about 40 students total, meaning that only 10 students per house, 5 boys and 5 girls, exist. And that basically tracks with what you see in the book. Unfortunately, it doesn't track at all with the supposed size of the school. If each class was only 40 or 50 students large, you'd have a school with only 350 students. There are a couple things in J.K. Rowling's defense here. She is admittedly just bad at math. So, she is probably just bad at estimating when she says 1,000 students. She also says that, quote, while I imagined that there would be considerably more than 40 students in each year at Hogwarts, I thought that it would be useful to know a proportion of Harry's classmates, and to have names at my fingertips when action was taking place around the school.
So, Harry's year is Harry's year and the years kind of around Harry's year are a little bit misleading on how many students there are. There was a war going on. During the Wizarding War, I don't think a lot of people were having children, and people who were having children probably died. So, I have a feeling in a lot of cases, people, weren't exactly just like, hey, let's have a child. We might die tomorrow, but let's have a child. Some people, yes. Not everybody. So it makes sense for there to be a little bit less people at that time. So, yeah. I think normally there's about 1,000 students at Hogwarts, but, in some cases, which is 1,000 people isn't bad. That's, about 25 students per house per year, maybe 30 students per house per year. That's really not that bad. That's 120 students a year that seems doable. It was a smaller class because there were less children. And yeah, not everybody has to go to Hogwarts. So, carry on.
Referencing an original list of names that she had jotted down. And in practice, I agree with her sentiment. I also think that for a children's book, you also can't include all that many characters. If you turn it into Game of Thrones, kids just wouldn't read it. That's also my token Game of Thrones reference in this video. So, anyways, from a practical perspective, I don't.
Also, a token Game of Thrones reference assumes that every video that you do, you reference to Game of Thrones, which I feel like would be mildly annoying, but that's just me.
Disagree with her choice. What I have an issue with is something much larger and more impactful: the wizarding world as a whole. Imagine that there may have been 3 other schools in the UK, Ireland, and Scotland, feeding adult wizards into society. Heck, pretend they have 20 schools. That still only means 1,000 new witches and wizards in adult society each year. That's like one class from a small college. That just isn't nearly enough to maintain a society. Think about when Harry goes to the Quidditch World Cup. Quote, "They walked through the woods for 20 minutes, talking and joking loudly, until at last they emerged on the other side and found themselves in the shadow of a gigantic stadium. Though Harry could see only a fraction of the immense gold walls surrounding the field, he could tell that 10 cathedrals would comfortably fit inside it. Seats 100,000, said Mr. Weasley, spotting the awestruck look on Harry's face." End quote. 100,000? That's so many people. And it would imply a population much larger than 100,000, as I would assume that only a small fraction of non-muggles attend a Quidditch match, even the World Championship. I don't know how much more math I can really do, but the point is, none of this math makes
100,000 makes sense. If there's 1,000 kids in Hogwarts, say 130, 120 a year, and you live to be at least 120 years old, most people, and are still pretty active until the day you die. You don't have old age medical issues like muggles do. So, 120 people each year times 100 and we'll say 100 people of magic, right? There's tens of thousands of wizards in the UK alone, not counting worldwide. So 100,000 people is feasible. Also, that's not saying that there are 100,000 people in there. It can seat up to 100,000 people. There's probably, I would give it 10,000 empty seats. If it is sold out, yeah, 100,000 people makes sense if you're having people come from all around the world. Let's see. Echo, how many people are expected to attend the World Cup this year?
About 6.5 million people are expected to attend.
Echo, stop. 6.5 million people for the FIFA World Cup. So proportionally, that kind of makes sense. 100,000 people is not irrespectable.
Any sense. There aren't enough graduating adult magic people to support Magic Society. It might make sense if everyone works in Diagon Alley, but if everyone works there, there's no way they could fill up a stadium of 100,000 seats. Someone make it make sense.
But he even is saying, oh, it's like, everybody works in Diagon Alley. No, we're never told that everybody works in Diagon Alley. At no point was it said, yeah, look, everybody gets a job in Diagon Alley. The ministry hires a ton of people. So, and why are you just thinking it's people from the UK? We know there's people from all around the world. There's the Salem witch trials. You get people from, or the Salem School of Magic. We're getting all sorts of people. So it's not. I don't know where he's getting his idea. And he says he's doing the math. Okay.
Wand allegiance. One of the defining moments in Deathly Hallows is the ownership of the Elder Wand. It's a central plot point to why Voldemort is defeated in the first place. The wand belongs to Harry, and thus it refuses to kill him. So, Draco disarms Dumbledore and becomes the owner of the Elder Wand. And then later on, Harry disarms Draco. But Draco isn't holding the Elder Wand. It's buried with Dumbledore. So, apparently it knows that Draco is a little punk and lost to Harry, so it chooses to change its allegiance. We know that the Elder Wand is exceptionally fickle, changing allegiance with the smallest opportunity. But it makes me wonder more about the rest of the wands in the series. J.K. Rowling has since posted a very detailed article talking about all the different types of wands and the personality traits of each, but I kind of just want to ignore it. I get the feeling that it's written almost entirely with the express.
There's a reason behind it, but I'm going to ignore it because I don't like it. Okay.
Purpose of getting kids to purchase toy wands. Let's stay in the world of what ifs for a moment.
Is the article on Pottermore service to get people to buy wands? I never got that. But apparently it's, because, kids are going to go and read Pottermore and go, ooh, you know what? I'm going to buy a wand because I read this article. Yep, that's what I want to do. Okay.
Longer. We know that some wands are prone to changing allegiance, and while a practice duel might not trigger this change in alliance, there are certainly real fights that students have with each other. You would think that there would be students that lose ownership and allegiance of their wands over time. Also, what about all the battles with Death Eaters that take place in the last couple books? Harry literally fires off Expelliarmus every other page. He must be the true owner of 100 different wands by the time we get to the end.
It's not just... I think this is a point that people miss. It's not just the... if you get disarmed, your wand is no longer loyal to you. It's if you get disarmed and you never get your wand back, it may not be loyal to you. So if Harry did take some of these wands, and not all wands give their allegiance. So it's one of those things, it's like you're missing the bigger point. You're being too granulated in your investigation and not actually looking at the whole idea. Just because you're Expelliarmus and disarmed doesn't mean your loyalty has gone to the person who disarms you, because it could... if Harry took all their wands and never gave them back, yeah, he probably would have their loyalty, because the wands will be like, okay, I no longer like this guy.
End of the story. And while we think back on all the Death Eaters that must suddenly be disappointed by a wand that no longer listens to them, let's move down to level 4. Barty Crouch Jr. Portkey. At this point, we've had about 15 other plot holes in this video. Let's break it up with one that isn't actually a plot hole. At least, not as far as I can understand. I actually started researching this intending to write a bit about it as it being a fairly obvious plot hole. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized that might not actually be the case. Goblet of Fire ends with Harry racing through the hedge maze and teleporting, along with Cedric, to the graveyard through the use of a surprise portkey at the center. Barty Crouch Jr. is the one that plants this portkey in the maze with the purpose of getting Harry Potter out of Hogwarts and in front of Voldemort. Why, though, does he wait all the way until the final event of the Triwizard Tournament to whisk Harry away? Surely there would have been plenty of other opportunities to kidnap Harry and send him to the graveyard. But I think there is a key point that's being overlooked here. The whole idea was that Voldemort's resurrection was supposed to be a secret. Voldemort wanted to rule from the shadows, so stealing Harry in broad daylight and using him to resurrect Voldemort would have defeated that purpose. So, how do you bring Voldemort back in secret? Surely, no matter what you do, if you bring Harry there, he's just going to blab to everyone that Voldemort is back the second he returns to Hogwarts. So, That's why I think there's a bit of an insidious plot line hidden there that people don't really think about too much. Harry was very clearly supposed to go to the graveyard in order to bring Voldemort back, but Harry was not supposed to return to Hogwarts. At least, not the Harry that we knew. I think the actual plan was for Voldemort to kill Harry, and then through the use of a Polyjuice potion, have someone, maybe Wormtail, disguise themselves.
This is a Super Carlin Brothers theory. Like, most of this stuff, it comes directly, almost word for word, from a Super Carlin Brothers theory. I think a more easy explanation is the fact that Krum was already Imperious. Krum probably was supposed to kill Cedric Diggory. Harry got involved. Yeah, Krum was supposed to kill Diggory. Harry transports himself to the graveyard, then probably gets transported back, or even not transported back, and then Victor Krum just kind of wins. Nobody realizes it, and they just be like, oh yeah, no, Cedric Diggory and Harry died. Oh well. So, I don't know.
As Harry
We like to make
return to
things
Hogwarts
complicated.
and leave for the summer. That would have given Voldemort ample time to gain strength over those few months. And when Harry didn't show up at the start of school next year, he likely would have had another month or so before anyone really figured out what was going on. So, in the end, Barty Crouch Jr. doesn't kidnap Harry Potter early in the story because it wouldn't have been in accordance with the plan. It's not so much a plot hole as it is a somewhat unclear component of Voldemort's return. Hermione memory spells. Hermione is always the smart one, but even she loses track of things on occasion. So who can blame her? They have a lot of stuff going on, which may be why in the Death...
There's a difference between obliviation and planting in false memories. That's it. We've talked about it before in last week's stream, so there we go.
Deathly Hallows, she completely forgets that she knows how to perform some magic that she just did a few chapters earlier.
Nope.
Early on in Book 7, we see that Ron and Hermione have agreed to join Harry on his mission to find Horcruxes and defeat Voldemort. The first step for Hermione in doing this is to wipe her parents' memories and, in fact, their entire identities. Quote, I've also modified my parents' memories so that they're convinced that they're called Wendell and Monica Wilkins, and that their life's ambition is to move to Australia, which they've now done. That's to make it more difficult for Voldemort to track them down and interrogate them about me, or you, because unfortunately I've told them quite a bit about you. End quote. That's a smart, albeit very sad plan, but she is clearly skilled enough with the magic to implant a few completely different ideas in her parents' heads and have them fully accept it. That's why it's all the more confusing later in the book when they are ambushed by some Death Eaters and Hermione blanks on her skills entirely. At this point, they have disarmed and subdued the attackers, and Ron and Hermione are figuring out what to do with them. Quote, what are we going to do with them? Ron whispered to Harry through the dark. Then, even more quietly, kill them? They'd kill us. They had a good go just now. Hermione shuddered and took a step backward. Harry shook his head. We just need to wipe their memories, said Harry. It's better like that. It'll throw them off the scent. If we killed them, it'd be obvious we were here. You're the boss, said
Hermione didn't wipe her parents' memories. She made them think that they were someone else, implanted false memories, but their memories were still underneath, so that when Hermione went and found them after the Wizarding War, she would be able to bring their memories back and allow them to live their normal life. Probably slightly upset with Hermione at the time, but still. There's a difference between implanting false memories and completely removing memories.
Ron, sounding profoundly relieved. But I never done a memory charm. Nor have I, said Hermione, but I know the theory. She took a deep, calming breath, then pointed her wand at Dulhov's forehead and said, obliviate.
Plotholes?
End quote. I've never done a memory charm, nor have I. What? You literally wiped your parents' memories completely just a few weeks ago.
Did not
What do you mean
completely
you've
wipe
never done a memory
them.
charm? There isn't really all too much to read about this one. I think it might just be a case of overlooking a line of text in the editing phase. It's always possible that this line was written before the section about Hermione wiping her parents' memories as well, meaning maybe J.K. Rowling just didn't remember that Hermione mentioned not having done a memory charm later in the book. Then, when she writes the part about Hermione wiping her parents' memory, she just forgets, and thus creates a plot hole.
Not a plot
Overall,
hole.
I'd put this plot hole in the
Not a plot hole.
inconsequential category. Platform 9 and 3/4.
Are we categorizing them now?
There are few things that stick out or are as memorable as Platform 9 and 3/4. It is quite literally the start of both Harry and the reader's journey to this magical world, and something I don't think that I would ever forget. Which is all the more reason that it strikes me as so odd that another character who has been attending this school their entire life doesn't seem to remember how to get to the train. Quote, Harry swung round. The speaker was a plump woman who was talking to 4 boys, all with flaming red hair. Each of them was pushing a trunk like Harry's in front of him, and they had an owl. Heart hammering, Harry pushed his cart after them. They stopped, and so did he, just near enough to hear what they were saying. Now, what's the platform number? Said the boy's mother. 9 3/4, piped a small girl, also red-headed, who was holding her hand. Mom, can't I go? You're not old enough, Jenny. Now be quiet. All right, Percy, you go first. End quote. That's right. Molly Weasley, of all people, doesn't remember where platform 9 3/4 is, even after literally sending her kids to school through the brick column hundreds of times. I mean, think of all the holiday breaks, the first days of school, not to mention her time as a student. How could she ever forget 9 3/4? The only explanation I can think of, and it's a somewhat interesting but rather benign one, is that the platform has changed over time. Think, for example, about what would happen.
Or maybe she just wanted to make her daughter feel accepted. Be like, hey, what platform is it again, guys? Just what platform is it? Platform 9 3/4. All right, we know where we're going. Seems pretty reasonable for me. I don't know about you. But yeah. Okay. Let's be like, oh, what a dumb bitch. She doesn't even know where platform 9 3/4 is, so it must have changed. No, it hasn't changed. It's always been platform 9 3/4. There's also the theory that misinfo and fanfic headcanon stuff. Yeah, I mean that, especially this video. This is a very long video, especially since I've been pausing so much. But this guy very much clearly is someone who reads a lot of fan fiction and is more of a fan of the movies than the books, based on some of his arguments. But yeah, there's also the fan theory that Molly saw Harry and was like, hey, maybe I should yell the number out so, he can figure out how to get to freaking school because he's all by himself. Because she's a good mother. Yeah, we'll continue listening. See what he has.
The Muggle side of the train station decided to change around where its platforms were. That doesn't seem out of the question. So the best explanation I can think of for this is that every year, parents also get a letter in the mail from Hogwarts, doing a little house cleaning. I'd imagine it has new rules, many probably inspired by the shenanigans of Fred and George, and also instructions for the upcoming semester, including where they can find the platform for the Hogwarts Express this year. Harry?
But if that were the case, his explanation doesn't make sense, because if that were the case, wouldn't they have changed platform 9 3/4 at least once in the series, just to be like, it's not always platform 9 3/4?
The Horcrux. All right, I've saved what I think is the best for last. A top.
All right. Before we get into this final plot hole of this video and move on to the next one, I'm going to guess that he's going to talk about the fact that the basilisk should have killed the Horcrux within Harry. 100%. I think it's going to be, he's going to talk about that.
Topic so dark that J.K. Rowling was forced to remove it from the book, but in doing so, I think has created a plot hole that rocks the foundation of the series. Horcruxes are all at once both simple plot devices and also responsible for some of the most hotly debated fan theories in the series. At the center of it all is one that, I'll be honest, I don't really have an explanation for, so I'll need your input for it. Why, exactly, is Harry a Horcrux to begin with? Let's back up and have Dumbledore give us some context. Quote, Dumbledore took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Tell him that on the night Lord Voldemort tried to kill him, when Lily cast her own life between them as a shield, the killing curse rebounded upon Lord Voldemort, and a fragment of Voldemort's soul was blasted apart from the whole, and latched itself on to the only living soul left in that collapsed building. Part of Voldemort's soul lives inside Harry, and it is that which gives him the power of speech with snakes and a connection with Lord Voldemort's mind that he has never understood. End quote. Dumbledore claims that when Voldemort's spell rebounded, it blasted a part of his soul from the whole, and that the piece of his soul latched onto the only other living soul in the building, Harry. Normally, I might accept this explanation, but seeing as it's the cornerstone of the entire series, I feel like it needs a little more to back it up. Specifically because J.K. Rowling describes, or at least hints, around the edges of what is required to make a Horcrux. Quote, I see it as a series of things you would have to do. So you would have to perform a spell, but you would also... I don't even know if I want to say it out loud. I know that sounds funny, but I did really think it through. There are two things that I think are too horrible, actually.
He's thinking that Harry is a proper Horcrux. That's the, okay, so it's not the whole basilisk could have killed him. So he's thinking the basilisk, or the not the basilisk, uh, the Horcrux shouldn't have happened because there's certain ways, even though Harry is not a proper Horcrux. One second.
to go into detail about. One of them is how Pettigrew brought Voldemort back into a rudimentary body. Because I told my editor what I thought happened there, and she looked as though she was going to vomit. And then, the other thing is how you make a Horcrux. End quote. Important here is that in order to create a Horcrux, there is a series of things that you would have to do. It's not just as simple as murdering someone, as even though it might be rare, they have a spell that does exactly that. It's not like it wouldn't happen. And you don't see every random serial killer creating Horcruxes left and right, so it must involve some type of process.
All right, so back to what I was saying about the fact that he's mad that Voldemort created an unintentional Horcrux without doing the proper magic. Voldemort, at that point, his soul was so fractured from all of the murder and no remorse, because you can fix your soul back together. It's not like serial killers are just going to accidentally create Horcruxes. It's the fact that his soul was already fractured and unstable because it was split so many times. And after that, he was then exploded. So there's a pretty good chance that the piece of his soul broke off and then, of course, would attach to the closest living soul in the building. Okay, this is 34, so this is something's in the wrong spot. That in the wrong spot. Anyway, back to the video.
Further, the only thing I can think of is that the process must also involve, in some way, the body of the person that is being murdered to create that Horcrux. That's just the only thing that makes sense, especially if J.K. Rowling is hinting that it's depraved enough to make her editor want to vomit. I'm not going to go into specifics here, both because no one really knows, and also I don't want to get demonetized, but suffice to say, it must be pretty bad. The offshoot of this, however, is that I don't think Voldemort did this series of things with James and Lily Potter. He just walked in, killed them, and then tried to kill Harry. So in essence, there was no preparation done to make a Horcrux, so I don't think one should have been created. Maybe Voldemort's body should have just turned into smoke like the end of Philosopher's Stone and flown away, but I don't think it should have attached to Harry in the way that it did. But there's no time left to think about it. We're at the end of the iceberg. This is probably my longest iceberg video yet, so I'm hoping you're liking it, and I'm hoping you're finding the content engaging all the way through. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What was your favorite? What plot holes did I miss? If you're looking for more content, I've got a bunch of other icebergs on the channel. Lots about Harry Potter, but also some about other fictional series like Star Wars and Game of Thrones. Check them out. And that does it. As always, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Hello and welcome to another video about the Harry Potter universe and everything wrong with it. I want to say this up front, this is not a video about plot holes. There might be some in here, but really this is just my running list of issues and nitpicks. The word plot hole gets thrown around a lot, and I can't claim to be immune, but just because the characters don't do something doesn't make it a plot hole. But it might make it annoying. So, get your typing fingers ready. I'm positive there's going to be many comments that disagree with my entries because you guys can't even let me mispronounce the word draft without letting me know many times. Let's get into it. Level 1. Wizard money. Let's start with the first topic that came to my mind when I was starting this list. The wizarding economy, or rather, the lack of one. In a world full of spells, dragons, magical chocolate frogs, and jelly beans that taste like puke, the real fantasy is any sort of coherent economic structure. If you thought buying a house in America was hard, wait until you have to show up at closing with 80,000 galleons in the trunk of your car because there's only one bank in the country and no such thing as magical credit cards. All right, let's take it one step.
All right. I'm going to argue this too. There could be a note. I mean, we see it in Prisoner of Azkaban. At the end, Crookshanks took a note to Quality Quidditch Supplies and said, take the money out of this vault. So right there, it's basically a check that you take it to Gringotts, and Gringotts will transfer the money from one vault to the other. Next.
Step at a time. First, just because I have no other place to mention it, but also because Hagrid explains the way currency works, here's Harry discovering he's a trust fund baby in Philosopher's Stone. All yours, smiled Hagrid. All Harry's. It was incredible. The Dursleys couldn't have known about this, or they'd have had it from him faster than blinking. How often had they complained how much Harry cost them to keep? And all the time, there had been a small fortune belonging to him, buried deep under London. Hagrid helped Harry pile some of it into a bag. The gold ones are galleons, he explained. 17 silver sickles to a galleon, and 29 nuts to a sickle. It's easy enough. Right, that should be enough for a couple of terms. We'll keep the rest safe for you. It's a good thing they made it easy to remember because no one has smartphones or Venmo to do the math for them. I say this as a joke because, of course, after I wrote it, I discovered J.K. Rowling has an answer for this that was retconned into place. It comes from Pottermore. Witches and wizards are not averse to laborious calculations, which they can, after all, do magically. They do not find it inconvenient to weigh in ounces, pounds, and stones, measure in inches, feet, and miles, or pay for goods in nuts, sickles, and galleons. I'm warning you that this is the first of...
Yes. He says nuts instead of knuts.
Many instances throughout this video where a perfectly good plot hole...
He also says gallons instead of galleons. So, he already said that he pronounces things improperly, so I guess we can't really make fun of him for that, but his logic really isn't great, and unfortunately, we're stuck on the same video creator as the last one, so I'm sorry.
Was ruined by a blog post written 10 years after the fact, so get used to it, I guess. They don't use calculators because, of course, they don't, but they do have some kind of spell that they cast to help them do mental math. Maybe that's part of the reason they don't have normal classes in school. I also just want to point out, while we're on the topic of Harry's fortune, just how poor the Weasleys really are. We see the inside of their vault in Chamber of Secrets, and honestly, I don't know how Harry sleeps at night unless it's literally on a pile of golden galleons. The vaults were reached by means of small goblin-driven carts that sped along miniature train tracks through the bank's underground tunnels. Harry enjoyed the breakneck journey down to the Weasleys' vault, but felt dreadful, far worse than he had in Nocturne Alley when it was opened. There was a very small pile of silver sickles inside, and just one gold galleon. Mrs. Weasley felt right into the corners before sweeping the whole lot into her bag. Harry felt even worse when they reached his vault. He tried to block the contents from view as he hastily shoved handfuls of coins into a leather bag. According to an interview with J.K. Rowling, the approximate value of a galleon is 5 British pounds, though at least she has the decency to mention that the exchange rate varies. God forbid that there isn't any logic to her monetary system. Anyways, that means the Weasleys had maybe $6 or $7 in their vault. Maybe there's been some inflation since then or something, but there's no way that's enough to buy school supplies for each Weasley child. Speaking of that single galleon, do you want to take a guess as to what it's made of? Did you guess pure solid gold? Because of course that's the answer. The value of the coins isn't linked to the value of gold bullion, but that's not totally unusual. Pennies are valued at 1 cent, but if you melt them down, it's worth less than that. If you melt down a penny that's from the mid-1900s, it's worth closer to 3 cents. Too bad if you melt down a galleon, it would contain more than $500 worth of gold. At some point, that difference starts to become problematic. Imagine for a moment the average home in the US. Let's say it costs $400,000. Using Rolling's quick conversion rate and ignoring the exchange rate from pounds to US dollars, that's about 80,000 galleons, or half a ton of gold. What if instead of locking in a mortgage payment, you melted down those galleons and sold the gold? If you do the math, that's about $50 million worth of it, spent on a $400,000 home. I'm not an expert, but even if...
I also think since it is goblin made, it's not wizard. The money is not wizard made. I think it's goblin casted because it has the serial number on the goblin who casts the galleons. I'm pretty sure they are probably not able to be melted down to be able to turn into things. But, why would you use that logic of how goblin forging works?
If muggles don't accept galleons, they certainly accept cold, hard gold. Not only does the currency system not make any sense, it's also frustrating to watch characters within the series act in a way that doesn't align with the context of their situation. For instance, the wagers that are made at the Quidditch World Cup. Arthur Weasley bets 1 galleon, which is 95% of his net worth in Book 2. The twins, on the other hand, place an even bigger wager. We'll bet 37 galleons, 15 sickles, 3 nuts, said Fred as he and George quickly pooled all their money. That Ireland wins, but Victor Crumb gets the snitch. Oh, and we'll throw in a fake wand.
All right.
Ludo Bagman replies, I'll give you excellent odds on that one. We'll add 5 galleons for the funny wand then, shall we? It's mentioned that it's the twins' life savings, but Ludo Bagman never pays out, cheating them out of what must have been a small fortune in their eyes. Of course, Harry gives them his winnings from the Triwizard Tournament, but still, no one in this situation, save maybe Harry, because he's already loaded, is acting in a rational manner. Mr. Weasley sheepishly bets most of his money, and the twins enthusiastically wager their life savings, and they don't really care that it's lost. One other note here is that Ludo Bagman valued their fake wand at 5 galleons, which must have been a great fake wand considering Ollivander charged Harry 7 galleons for his real wand just a few years prior. Honestly, it's not like I need to see a robust credit-based economic system in order for it to feel real, but when the characters within the story don't function according to their own rules, the stakes kind of fizzle out. That's something of a theme for this entire video. Nitpicks and plot holes definitely, but really, many of these topics are just characters showing an overall lack of congruence with the world that they live in. So, with that, let's transform into our next topic. Polyjuice potions aren't that big of a deal? The Polyjuice potion is introduced in Chamber of Secrets as this incredibly advanced, borderline forbidden potion that requires a month to brew, and before that, a pretty solid understanding of potion making. So, naturally, 12-year-olds manage it with only mild inconveniences. Now, at first, the limitations make sense. You need a bit of the person you're impersonating, so it's not like witches and wizards are constantly sipping on Polyjuice potion. There are some barriers to entry, but the more you think about it, the more ridiculous its underuse becomes and how strange the indifference towards it is. Take the first Wizarding War in Goblet of Fire, we get this ominous rundown from Sirius of how bad things were back then. Alright, I'll try you. He walked up the cave, back again, and then said, "Imagine that Voldemort's powerful now. You don't know who his supporters are, you don't know who's working for him, and who isn't. You know that he can control people so that they do terrible things without being able to stop themselves. You're scared for yourself and for your family and for your friends. Every week, news comes of more deaths, more disappearances, more torturing. The Ministry of Magic's in disarray. They don't know what to do. They're trying to keep everything hidden from the Muggles. Meanwhile, Muggles are dying too. Terror everywhere. Panic. Confusion. That's how it used to be. The wizarding world was in total chaos. No one knew who they could trust. The Ministry was useless. Muggle deaths were piling up. It's not really a good time in the Potterverse. And yet, there's no indication that it was illegal or even particularly rare to use a Polyjuice Potion. There also doesn't appear to be any way to tell if someone's using a Polyjuice Potion aside from quizzing them with secrets or inside jokes or something. If there were, Goblet of Fire would have been a very short book. Honestly, there doesn't seem to be a great counter to the Polyjuice Potion. You could have had a passcode, but that's pretty easy to leak, and in a world where mind reading is possible, albeit a difficult skill, passwords don't really seem like a great idea. Honestly, the best solution I would have would be to force someone to cast a Patronus. It basically functions as your wizarding passport, so that might do the trick, but even still, not everyone.
He's about to say, not everyone can produce a Patronus. All right. I mean, he's getting a little bit deep into the problems with Polyjuice Potion. Which are perfectly reasonable, but also at the same time, all right. I mean, are you looking too deep into a children's book that's really supposed to be a mystery novel?
Can cast a Patronus. Not everyone in the Harry Potter world is a skilled witch or wizard. In fact, I'd guess that most are not, which leaves no great way for the masses to prove their identity with 100% certainty. But fine, we'll move on from that. In the Deathly Hallows, we get an entire sequence where everyone turns into Harry, but it's followed by this tense exchange between Harry and Lupin. No sooner had Mrs. Weasley bent over her son than Lupin grabbed Harry by the upper arm and dragged him, none too gently, back into the kitchen, where Hagrid was still attempting to ease his bulk through the back door. "Oi," said Hagrid indignantly. "Let go of him. Let go of Harry." Lupin ignored him. "What creature sat in the corner the first time that Harry Potter visited my office at Hogwarts?" he said, giving Harry a small shake. "Answer me." "A Grindylow in a tank, wasn't it?" Lupin released Harry and fell back against a kitchen.
A Grindylow. Okay.
Cupboard. What was that about?" roared Hagrid. "I'm sorry, Harry, but I had to check," said Lupin tersely. "We've been betrayed. Voldemort knew that you were being moved tonight, and the only people who could have told him were directly involved in the plan. You might have been an imposter." "So why aren't you checking me?" panted Hagrid, still struggling to fit through the door. "You're half giant," said Lupin, looking up at Hagrid. "The Polyjuice Potion is designed for human use only." Alright, Lupin pieces together that they've been betrayed. Lupin, who was present for the mass Polyjuice Potion party just hours earlier, is understandably paranoid and justified in confirming Harry's identity, and yet nobody else is getting checked. Not Tonks, not Kingsley, not Mr. Weasley, just Harry. Hagrid gets a free pass because he's half giant, that makes sense, but what about everyone else? Before you comment, yes, I know it could have happened off the page. I know, I get it. I'm just speculating here, okay? Just hold your horses. If impersonation is such a threat that you need to aggressively quiz Harry, why wasn't this standard protocol every time the order met? Did they ever think to check Mad-Eye Moody after the whole Barty Crouch Jr. incident? One of their most powerful members was kidnapped. Barty Crouch Jr. is able to trick everyone for an entire school year, and yet nobody developed a healthy level of paranoia, except Lupin. One time. Quidditch World Cup Panic. I know this is a video about nitpicking and plot holes, but sometimes I come across something that I really think needs a second look. Case in point, the panic that ensues at the Quidditch World Cup before Harry's 4th year at Hogwarts. Some argue that the over-the-top level of fear shown is not realistic. After all, these are trained magical adults. They should have survived years underneath Voldemort's reign. Why does everyone immediately lose their minds at a handful of Death Eaters levitating, torturing a few muggles? Which, by the way, why is the campsite for the Quidditch World Cup on a muggle-owned campground? Or really, why do they have to be there in the first place? Make up a magical reason to send them away for a week or something. I don't know. Just, don't let them stay there and wipe their minds every 20 minutes.
They don't care about muggles.
Really any better than the Death Eaters. But this is one instance where I actually want to point out something that isn't a plot hole and actually makes a whole lot of sense. First, the Dark Mark. Ron is skeptical at first because he's never seen it and he doesn't know the history, but Mr. Weasley quickly sets him straight. "I told you, it's you-know-who's symbol, Ron," said Hermione before anyone else could answer. "I read about it in The Rise and Fall of Dark Arts. And it hasn't been seen for 13 years, said Mr. Weasley quietly. Of course people panicked. It was almost like seeing you-know-who back again. I don't get it, said Ron, frowning. I mean, it's still only a shape in the sky. Ron, you-know-who and his followers sent the Dark Mark into the air whenever they killed, said Mr. Weasley. The terror it inspired, you have no idea. You're too young. Just picture coming home and finding the Dark Mark hovering over your house and knowing that what you're about to find inside. Mr. Weasley winced. Everyone's worst fear. The very worst. It's really not just about the shape in the sky, it's about what it represents. If you saw one over your home, that basically meant the worst had happened and someone you knew or loved was dead inside. So when that skull goes up in the sky for the first time in 13 years, of course people freak out. Imagine you lived through a reign of terror where anyone could be murdered at any time, and the one way you'd be sure to remember was a giant neon green skull and snake in the sky. Now imagine that symbol appears again after more than a decade of peace. It's traumatic. And then there's the fact that at this point, nobody actually knows how dead Voldemort really is. Sure, Dumbledore and a few others suspect he's not totally gone, but for the average witch or wizard, it's been pretty quiet for over 13 years, and the Death Eaters who weren't in Azkaban have mostly been lying low, pretending they were never part of Voldemort's gang. So, when they suddenly reappear, tormenting muggles no less, it's not just some isolated attack, it's basically reliving a nightmare. And Voldemort aside, the Death Eaters didn't even really need him to be that terrifying. They spent years as a terrorist group, freely torturing and murdering anyone they chose. Again, all the more reason for the panic. So the idea that, a good guy with a wand will stop a bad guy with a wand, not the case. All right, enough non-plot holes. Let's get back into the things that really annoy me. Slytherins in the dungeon. Thought you ought to know. For all his wisdom, Dumbledore has a few questionable leadership moments. One, raising Harry for slaughter, basically, but another moment happens pretty early on in Harry's very first year. Quirrell bursts into the Great Hall in a full panic to tell everyone about a problem that he created. Harry was just helping himself to a baked potato when Professor Quirrell came sprinting into the hall, his turban askew and terror on his face. Everyone stared as he reached Professor Dumbledore's chair, slumped against the table, and gasped, "Troll, in the dungeons. Thought you ought to know." Then he sank to the floor in a dead faint. There was an uproar. It took several purple firecrackers exploding from the end of Professor Dumbledore's wand to bring silence. "Prefects," he rumbled, "lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately." Now, setting aside the fact that this is the worst possible way to deliver news of an emergency situation, don't you dare write a comment. I know his goal was to create chaos. You don't need to tell me that. Just keep listening. The real issue comes in Dumbledore's response to lead the houses back to their respective dorms. Sounds reasonable, except for one small detail. The Slytherin dormitories are literally in the dungeons. I'm not sure if we necessarily find that out until book 2, when Harry and Ron are polyjuiced up as Crabbe and Goyle. The Slytherins always come up to...
One of the problems I have with this is people have brought this up, but just because there are multiple ways into the dungeons. There's the one that takes you down to the classrooms. There's the one that takes you to the Slytherin dorms. There's also the one that takes the Hufflepuff. Are we not worried about the Hufflepuff dungeons? Like, there's multiple dungeons in Hogwarts. It's not, and you could say, well, but maybe it's the Slytherin dungeon. It's like, okay. But if you played Hogwarts Legacy and you consider it slightly canon, the Hogwarts Legacy has multiple entrances into the dungeon, and some dungeons lead to a dead end. So that's my argument.
"Breakfast from over there," said Ron, nodding at the entrance to the dungeons. The words had barely left his mouth when a girl with long curly hair emerged from the entrance. "There is an active troll threat in the dungeons, and the first course of action is to send roughly a quarter of the student population directly toward it." Incredible. Maybe Dumbledore just forgot where the Slytherin common room was. He's been in Hogwarts for decades, but mistakes happen. Maybe he was just caught up in the moment. But what's Snape doing? You'd think at the very least the head of House Slytherin would have the common sense to say, hey, Dumbledore, like, send them somewhere else for like a minute until we take care of the troll issue. But no one, not Snape, not any Slytherin student who just heard Quirrell say that there's a troll in the dungeon. No one stops to think for a minute. At this point, what are the prefects thinking? Do they just start marching the Slytherins down the stairs, hoping for the best? Did anyone at any point pause and think, hey, should we not be doing this? Or did everyone just accept that Dumbledore was a man of mystery, operating on some higher plane of logic, always one step ahead? In the end, it all worked out because the troll conveniently wandered into the girls' bathroom instead, but let's be honest, that doesn't happen every time. And Hogwarts doesn't really have a great track record. Trolls, a basilisk, then Dementors, then basically Voldemort. I would really probably reconsider my school selection if I'm honest. Also, one more point, sorry. In that quote from before, when Harry and Ron are looking for the Slytherin dorm room as Crabbe and Goyle, they meet up with Draco, from whom we learn that the password for the Slytherin dorm is pureblood. Like, what are we even doing here? How are people able to defend the Slytherin house? They're all terrible people. All right, enough of that. We're moving on to level 2. Quidditch. There are a few topics on my list that I just sense are going to be controversial in the comments, but here goes. Quidditch is a completely nonsensical sport. I'm honestly not totally sure where to start with this one, so I'll begin at the beginning, with a problem that I will freely admit is a nitpick. It's not a plot hole. Harry's age. I see you. Before you comment, that's not a plot hole. I know that. But I still have a problem with it. Harry is 11 when he becomes Gryffindor's Seeker. Have you seen 11-year-olds play sports? I get it. He's the chosen one. His dad had a talent for flying, even though he was a chaser, and that's different. And Harry has some natural talent. McGonagall sees him catch Neville's Rememberall in a death-defying dive towards the ground the very first time he's ever flown on a broom, and she decides that he belongs on the team. But he is 11 years old. I'll admit I was wrong when I was nitpicking Victor Crumb being a world star Quidditch player. There's plenty of examples of an 18-year-old superstar. There are not plenty of examples of 11-year-old superstars, especially not in a population size as small as the wizarding community. It's like a D7 school. Don't tell me that 11-year-olds are that good. And let's talk about the game itself. Oliver Wood lays out the rules in Philosopher's Stone, and I want to read.
He's using high school football terms in a school that is the only school for 3 countries. You can't. The benefits of a seeker are the fact that a small seeker who can stay close to the broom and all they have to do is see a ball. I mean, if you could get a chihuahua to figure out how to fly, he'd probably be a good seeker too. So, I mean, the fact that you're saying just he's a tiny 11-year-old boy, yeah, that's what makes him a good seeker. He's tiny and can move fast. But, okay, let's keep listening and see.
The snitch section as a reminder. This, said Wood, is the golden snitch, and it's the most important ball of the lot. It's very hard to catch because it's so fast and difficult to see. It's the seeker's job to catch it. You've got to weave in and out of chasers, beaters, bludgers, and quaffle to get it before the other team's seeker, because whichever seeker catches the snitch wins his team an extra 150 points. So they nearly always win. That's why seekers get fouled so much. A game of Quidditch only ends when the snitch is caught, so it can go on for ages. And on the surface, the rules are fine. You score 10 points per goal with the quaffle, and the seeker's job is to catch the snitch, which is worth 150 points. 15 goals. And it ends the game. If the snitch is worth 150 points, nothing else matters. Oliver Wood says that whichever seeker catches the snitch nearly always wins, which is like saying, yeah, we let out.
Nearly always wins. That doesn't mean they always win, because we even see a situation where, actually we see 2 situations in the books where the snitch is caught, but the team that caught the snitch didn't win. Quidditch World Cup, and then the one game in Harry's 5th year where Ginny played, 6th year, where Harry was not, it was in Harry's 5th year, because Ginny played as Seeker, so Ginny caught the snitch and prevented Gryffindor from losing by too much.
Everyone fly around for a bit, and then the game is decided by one guy at the end. Or, at the very least, the balance of the game is ridiculous. There are a few scenarios. Scenario 1. The snitch is caught very early, long before many points have been scored, meaning those points are useless, as are the other players playing the game. Scenario 2. The game goes on far too long, like the record-setting 3-month-long game, which was more than likely a 10,000 point game, at which point 150 points for the snitch is probably inconsequential. Only in this perfect middle ground third scenario, where the game goes on for long enough for a potential 150 point difference to build up, does the snitch matter. But also in that case, if the score is 400 to 200, one of those teams is getting blown out. Enter Victor Crumb, world-class seeker who decides to catch the snitch while losing. And he was right. For the second time, Lynch hit the ground with tremendous force and was immediately stampeded by a horde of angry Vila. The snitch! Where's the snitch? Bellowed Charlie along the row. He's got it. Crumb's got it. It's all over, shouted Harry. Crumb, his red robes shining with blood from his nose, was rising gently into the air, his fist held high, a gold glint in his hand.
That is not the right
Scoreboard was flashing Bulgaria 160, Ireland 170 across the crowd, who didn't seem to have realized what had happened. Then slowly, as though a great jumbo jet were revving up, the rumbling from the Ireland supporters grew louder and louder, and erupted into screams of delight. "Ireland wins!" Bagman shouted, who, like the Irish, seemed to be taken aback by the sudden end of the match. "Crum gets the snitch, but Ireland wins. Good Lord, I don't think any of us were expecting that." Ireland is ahead by more than 150 points. Crum sees the snitch, and instead of waiting for his team to maybe bring the score back into range, he just grabs it anyway, ending the game. You might be saying, well, if he didn't grab it, the other team would. Yeah, exactly, but they were already winning, so again, the snitch doesn't matter. Why doesn't this generational talent just keep distracting the other seeker and hope for a chance to grab the snitch when the points would put their team ahead? He's already caused the opposing seeker to crash directly into the ground twice, so just hold off a little bit longer. Or if your team truly is worse, it's just never gonna matter, so again, what's the point of this game? Imagine watching a football game and then up in the stands there's two players just playing rock, paper, scissors, and the winner decides the whole game. That'd be a ridiculous sport. Why would we play that sport? We're not. We're moving on to the next one. Watching fish swim. On to another type of sport, the Triwizard Tournament. It's supposed to be the ultimate test of magical skill, bravery.
So the idea of the Quidditch game is it's supposed to be whimsical. And yeah, it is kind of silly that it's like, one player could technically decide most games, but it's like that was the thing about the Quidditch World Cup is you had a phenomenal seeker who is probably one of the best in the world in a generation versus a team that has some of the best chasers in a century. So it's kind of a race of, can the seeker catch the snitch faster than the chasers can rack up the points? Because if he could have caught the snitch before the Irish team got 150 points ahead, and his idea was like, well, Crum could have just kept going. It's like, Ireland was over 150 points ahead of Bulgaria. There was no catching up at that point, because for every one goal that Bulgaria scored, Ireland scored 4. So clearly Crum was hoping to catch the snitch as fast as possible, but didn't catch it fast enough, and they had fallen very far behind and were only going to fall further behind because of all the other things that were going on in the game. But he wants to find fault in something because he doesn't like it. So, all right, keep going. Let's talk about the Triwizard Tournament. And yeah, the Triwizard Tournament doesn't exactly make sense. It's not a spectator sport.
And intelligence, a high-stakes, strangely deadly series of tasks that draw massive crowds from students and parents. So you'd think that it'd be fun to watch, right? But of course not. The first task, dragons. That's a good start. Except, of course, that Harry immediately flies away from the stadium where no one can see him, but
that's in the movie, not in the books.
He's a bit of an outlier on that one. But on to task 2, the breath-holding contest. As he pounded down the lawn, he saw that the seats that had encircled the dragon's enclosure in November were now ranged along the opposite bank, rising in stands that were packed to the bursting point and reflected in the lake below. The excited babble of the crowd echoed strangely across the water as Harry ran flat out around the other side of the lake toward the judges, who were sitting at another gold-draped table at the water's edge. The stands are bursting with people, and as the timer starts, the champions jump in and immediately disappear. The task is an hour long, and it's just people staring at the lake for an hour. I saw some comments speculating that there would have been some sort of magical screen showing the action for the audience, but I don't think there is any support for that in the text. I think they all literally sat around for an hour and hoped that no one drowned. Which is a ridiculous part of this task. If Harry hadn't saved Fleur's sister, is the implication that they would have let her drown? Is this some sort of offering from Dumbledore to the merpeople? Again, I know that it's talked about in book 5. Somebody mentions that they wouldn't have let the sister drown, but there's plenty. The dragons, how do they stop the dragons from just like one-shotting Harry? These are very clearly real dangerous situations. Someone died one time. People can die again. They are dangerous. Anyway, task 3, staring at a bush. They walked onto the Quidditch field, which was now completely unrecognizable. A 20-foot high hedge ran all the way around the edge of it. There was a gap right in front of them, the entrance to a vast maze. The passage beyond it looked dark and creepy. "We're going to be patrolling the outside of the maze," said Professor McGonagall to the champions. "If you get in a difficulty and wish to be rescued, send red sparks into the air, and one of us will come and get you. Do you understand?" The champions nodded. The final task takes place inside a giant towering maze, where nobody can see anything. The champions enter, the hedges close behind them, and then the audience, their entire experience, consists of waiting. I will front run the comments a little bit here. I know there are plenty of sports where spectating is pretty much all you do, and standing around and you drink beer and watch, and I get it. Golf is not honestly that far off from the Triwizard Tournament. The only difference is the stakes of golf are not death. It's not like if you get a bogey, they kill you or drown your sister. And also, at least something still happens. They don't just disappear underwater the whole time and then, come up at the very end. Not a very good sport. Not a good event either. Hermione just needed an academic advisor. Time turners have probably been analyzed to death here, but time travel itself, at least within the Harry Potter universe, is home to so many potential plot holes. I get it. I just have a feeling that they've all been talked about at this point. And honestly, I think they're a little overstated. Are there arbitrary rules around the time turners that were introduced after the fact, like being limited to only going back 5 hours into the past? Yes. Is it a bit cheap that apparently every time turner was destroyed by Harry and crew in the Order of Phoenix? Absolutely. Do I really want to talk about that? Yeah, not particularly, but I do have one other potential application, you might call it, for the time turner. I want to focus first on Hermione's class schedule, which I will then extend into the depths of weird fan theories. We don't get to see most of the classes Hermione attends because characters generally don't exist if Harry's not in the same room with them. But we do have one snippet from Ron where he calls out what he thinks is a mistake early on in Book 3. "Hermione," said Ron, frowning as he looked over her shoulder, "they've messed up your schedule. Look, they've got you down for about 10 subjects a day. There isn't enough time." "I'll manage. I've fixed it with Professor McGonagall." "But look," said Ron, laughing, "see this morning, 9 o'clock divination, and underneath, 9 o'clock Muggle studies." And Ron leaned closer to the schedule, disbelieving. "Look, underneath that, arithmancy, 9 o'clock. I mean, I know you're good, Hermione, but no one's that good. How are you supposed to be in 3 classes at once?" Honestly, a pretty good moment of foreshadowing, which I've got another video on if you want to watch that. Somewhere up here. But it calls up an interesting conundrum. Typically, when we think about the time turner being used, it's for a single copy. You experience your timeline, some external event happens, like someone hits someone in the head with a rock or whatever. You realize in the future that you caused that event, and so you go back in time to create that event. But what if going back once wasn't enough? Because although J.K. Rowling patched the ability to go back years into the past, she doesn't appear to have patched the infinite glitch that's built into time turners. Hermione has at least 3 classes occurring at the same time, meaning there are at least 3 versions of herself running around at any given time. Hermione is a good student, so she obviously doesn't abuse the system, but what about someone using it for more nefarious purposes? A powerful wizard that would know how to cope with seeing copies of themselves. Someone like, I don't know, Voldemort. I think my issue is that even though the time loops are deterministic, couldn't you still go into a situation intending to use the time turner? I know there's going to be some complaints about this, but pretend you're Voldemort for a second. You have a very important battle happening at the Ministry of Magic. You also could have access to a time turner. Why not enter that situation with the intent to duplicate yourself? Once, twice, 20 times, as many times as you need, just for a couple hours, just to make sure everything goes smoothly. That would mean when you showed up to battle Dumbledore, you would simultaneously show up with a dozen copies of yourself. There's always someone in the comments that has an explanation for why my time traveling conundrum isn't actually a problem, and J.K. Rowling's brilliant and she solved everything and yada yada, but like, honestly, the time turners are a problem. When I started writing this section, it was gonna be about how Hermione just needed a private tutor or better.
All right, so time travel. Voldemort couldn't go back. You can't go back in time and interact with yourself because it causes a change in time. If you change time, then that causes magical, like, issues. That's part of the problem, is, like, people keep thinking, oh yeah, you can go back and change time. You can have multiple versions of yourself interact. It's like, no, there's more to it because you can change time that way. Time can't be changed. And he's still under the idea that time can be changed. At the point that somebody goes back in time, they are always going back in time, and there is no point where they haven't gone back in time. The end. Also, the class schedule doesn't, like, I do argue with the whole idea that the class schedule does not make sense, because she couldn't have 3 classes like that, because that assumes that there are other students who just didn't happen to take those classes at the same time. So if you took arithmancy, you're not taking charms, but you are required to take charms, so nobody can take charms and arithmancy. Or you can't take arithmancy and divination. I think the scheduling of the whole situation is bad.
Academic advising, but there's just no way to avoid being drawn into these stranger parts of the time turner. So let's jump back in time one more time to the Chamber of Secrets for our next topic. How didn't anyone notice the basilisk? The basilisk is a giant snake. I feel like that fact alone should have raised some serious questions. I know I've talked about the basilisk probably 15 times on this channel. I think it's the most ridiculous part of this whole story. I think it should have raised some serious questions. Hogwarts isn't exactly a small place, but it's not so big that a 50-foot serpent should be able to slither around completely unnoticed. And yet somehow, for an entire school year, nobody, student.
But it's also not 50 foot, and he's talked about it in the other video where it's like, yeah, it says it's 20 feet. So you can't say it's a 50-foot snake when it's actually 20 feet. If you're saying it's 50 foot, then that means you're quoting the movie, which the movie snake is not a proper size. And yeah, it wouldn't make sense for that giant snake from the movie to be able to travel through the castle.
Teachers, ghosts, magical paintings, Filch, Peeves, the literal headmaster manages to see or hear anything unusual. Okay. A couple moments to point out, starting with Moaning Myrtle, who describes her death. "Oh, it was dreadful," she said with relish. "It happened right in here. I died in this very cubicle. I remember it so well. I'd hidden because Olive Hornby was teasing me about my glasses. The door was locked, and I was crying, and then I heard somebody come in. They said something funny, a different language, I think it must have been. Anyway, what really got me was that it was a boy speaking, so I unlocked the door to tell him to go and use his own toilet, and then..." Myrtle swelled importantly, her face shining. "I died." "How?" said Harry. "No idea," said Myrtle in hushed tones. "I just remember seeing a pair of giant, big yellow eyes. My whole body sort of seized up, and then I was floating away." The entrance and exit to the Chamber of Secrets is in her bathroom. That's where the snake comes and goes. And yet, despite haunting this location for decades, Myrtle never once notices a basilisk-sized snake, the basilisk, leaving. Never hears anything, never questions anything. I mean, I guess the lore is that she's just always in there crying by herself and never really looks around. Still, Nearly Headless Nick gets petrified by the basilisk. I feel like Ghost Myrtle would have also been in the splash zone at some point. Also, how did they unpetrify Nearly Headless Nick? Do they just hold the potion in the middle of his body? Is that good enough? Regardless,
I think Nearly Headless Nick just recovered naturally. They didn't do anything with the potion.
there are other hints that should give away something. For instance, the hissing. And then Harry heard it. Rip, tear, kill. It was the same voice, the same cold, murderous voice he had heard in Lockhart's office. He stumbled to a halt, clutching at the stone wall, listening with all his might, looking around, squinting up and down the dimly lit passageway. Harry, what are you? It's the voice again. Shut up a minute. So hungry. For so long. Okay. We know Parseltongue isn't like a mind-to-mind communication. It's a spoken language. People can hear it. In Chamber of Secrets, Harry hears the basilisk as it moves through the walls. How doesn't anyone else hear this? If you type in the comments that other people don't speak Parseltongue, I'm going to ban you. I'm not saying they would hear words. I'm saying they would hear the walls hissing, or the sound of a giant snake slithering through old pipes. I get that it might be like the sounds of just like toilets flushing and everything, but I mean, still, it has a rhythm to it. It's not just like steam. It's a little bit more than that. And also, moving snakes don't make the sound of steam. I also want to get into Dumbledore here, but there's so much to talk about. I'm gonna save it for its own section, and then we'll come back to it. For now, I'm gonna move down to level 3. Alohomora Arms Race. Alohomora is way too powerful. This one spell, taught to first years, can unlock almost anything. If Alohomora worked all the time, Gringotts wouldn't exist. Azkaban wouldn't exist. The entire concept of locks wouldn't exist, because what's the point? At least until we learn about a little retcon that I just have to talk about, because it's just so frustrating. Let me remind you here, this is not a video necessarily about plot holes. It's problems that I have. Annoyances, if you will. This topic is not entirely about Alohomora, although that's the script that I've written. This applies to most of the magic and the general logic of J.K. Rowling. Create a spell or magical system full of issues and then...
So, I don't know why people think the Alohomora is the end-all be-all of unlocking spells. If you can magically unlock regular doors, it makes perfect sense that you can magically lock doors that even a key would not allow you to get in. So, I think that's kind of this is a silly argument, and he's going to probably go way into detail about how Alohomora is super powerful, and then they had to retcon it. It wasn't a retcon. You guys just think that Alohomora unlocks everything, even though it was just a simply, key locked door.
Retroactively publish blog posts that patch those issues. I think this is one of the main reasons people criticize the writing. I enjoyed the Harry Potter books as a kid, but when you start to compare the world building of the series with another fantasy story, it falls flat. I really want to make a video on the Name of the Wind and the Kingkiller Chronicles, so maybe I'll work on that next, but I'm currently reading through it again, and for all the issues people have with Patrick Rothfuss, his stories are a joy to read because the world is so layered. The smallest turns of phrase have potentially enormous implications that aren't brought to fruition for years and years and years and maybe forever. But anyways, back to Alohomora. This comes from what I believe was a guidebook that was released with a Harry Potter game all the way back in 2012. Then came the fateful day when Blagden Blay, a wizard who had been burgled 19 times in 2 weeks, succeeded in inventing an anti-Alohomora charm. In a single night, the wizarding doors of London were sealed shut, and task forces were dispatched to protect Muggle houses too. Enter Blagden Blay, a ridiculous name who, after being robbed 19 times in 2 weeks, which means more than once a day, finally invents a counter charm. Apparently, the entire wizarding world just let people magically break into their homes until this one guy had enough. That means before Blagden, burglars weren't sneaking around at night, they were just yelling Alohomora at people's doors and walking in. For however many centuries Alohomora existed beforehand? Like, this is the magical equivalent of realizing that maybe passwords should be longer than one single letter. And even with this retcon, it's really only relevant when it makes sense for the plot. Alohomora works in some cases, like in Book 1 when Dumbledore is testing the trio, but not in others, like when they discuss breaking into Umbridge's office in Book 5. The spell goes from being a universal unlock button to something that only works when the plot allows it, which is frustrating.
But basically all that story said was that he locked his door normally and Muggle doors normally, but somebody kept Alohomoring the doors and windows open until he came up with the spell that prevented Alohomora from getting into regularly locked doors. So he could easily have made doors that locked magically. I'm not sure why he's having such a fit about it. It makes sense to me that if you can magically unlock regular doors, you can magically lock them to prevent Alohomora from working. But a lot of people don't care about locking their doors.
On to another frustrating topic. Sirius Mirror. Harry Potter has never been one for caution. He breaks school rules with regularity, charges headfirst into dangerous situations, and generally treats safety as optional. So when Sirius Black hands him a magical two-way mirror, one that would let Harry communicate instantly with him, you'd think he'd use it. Sirius had beckoned him to his side. "I want you to take this," he said, quietly thrusting a badly wrapped package roughly the size of a paperback book into Harry's hands. "What is it?" Harry asked. "A way of letting me know if Snape's giving you a hard time." "No, don't open it here," said Sirius, with a wary look at Mrs. Weasley, who was trying to persuade the twins to wear hand-knitted mittens. "I doubt Molly would approve, but I want you to use it if you need me, all right?" "Okay," said Harry, stowing the package away in the inside pocket of his jacket, but he knew he would never use it, whatever it was.
You answered your question right there. You literally said, oh, well, he stowed it away not thinking about using it ever again. Okay. So there you go. That's why he didn't use it, is because he didn't want to use it, and then he stowed it away and then forgot about it. He literally forgot about it. All right. Well, I think I'm going to call it here today. It's been a quiet day. Have a good night, guys.